Now, my grandma used to take me camping when I was a child. I did a girls' camp in the summer in the mountains when I was a preteen, where my friends and I would often wander off into the woods together. As a child, I played in the woods for hours with my brother. It was always fun and always felt safe and never eerie or creepy. Most of my time in the woods as a child was spent there, and it was fun and joyful and adventurous. I'd like to share another story, however, that I had a bad feeling from, and others dismissed us too, but when we were in our 20s, a friend of mine in DC organised a women's survivalist training camp for our female friends, which is probably 7 or 8 of us, I can't remember exactly. No, I'd never been to West Virginia, but the land was beautiful and the roads were terrible. We had rented a cabin at a campground with multiple cabins on site, and during the day, now our guide and teacher would take us and show us cool things like local medicinal plants or how to make rope out of milkweed. A West Virginian extended family was having a large reunion at the same time. 2 to 3 of their girls, about elementary school age, start hovering around our classes. Now, they already knew most of what we're learning. We had a great time in the woods and on the land with no creepiness for the first night. However, on the last night, the owner of the campground had a big bonfire with hot dogs and marshmallows to roast and cider, and everybody who was renting a cabin was invited. It was after dark, and it was either a longish walk or a short drive, and this is on the campground land. So my friend A and I decided to walk. We were having a nice walk and a nice chat when we suddenly got a bad feeling. We both went quiet at the same time and were nonchalant, but glanced around to see what we could see. On our right was a cabin that looks deserted. It was totally dark, no lights on, no lantern out, but there was a single spot of light, the red embers of a cigarette burning. We could barely make out the figure of a man sitting there in the dark smoking. We stayed quiet but pick up the pace. We checked in with each other once we approached the big house, and we're finally in the light of the bonfire. Now that was creepy to us. Had we felt creepy before out there? No, calm and safe. The land hadn't ever felt creepy to us before, but the guy sitting in the dark had given a terrible menacing vibe, even 20 feet away before we saw him. We told some of our friends and they just laughed it off and told us that we'd been afraid for no reason. It was perfectly safe here, they said. He's just another camper, probably with the West Virginian family, and we're just paranoid, they say. Other than that, we had a great time at the bonfire, chatting with other campers and with the owners, who are very nice. When it came time to call it a night, the owners offered to drive us back, and A and I happily agreed. Now, wanting to avoid another walk by the terrible cabin, we got back safely without incident, and the owners wished us good night. Now, our cabin had 2 levels, the ground floor and a loft level. The ground floor was one big open room with a few beds, and if I recall correctly, a table and chairs and a fridge and maybe a stove. I was on the ground floor with the other 3 girls, and A was on the left level with the other 3 girls at the top. I often have insomnia, and I did that night, so I just stayed awake in the dark while everybody else fell asleep around me. I was awake for hours just thinking my thoughts until I heard the crunch of gravel outside, like somebody walking on it. I nudged my friend V, who was the closest person to me. I say to V there's someone outside, but V mumbled and said it's a deer and go back to sleep. So V's no help. I got out of bed and crawled over to the window to see if I could see a deer outside, crunching on gravel. I instead see the red glow of a cigarette and can barely make out the silhouette of 2 men in the darkness. Now, the 2 cabins are not close together. They weren't far, but they weren't close. We're on a bend of the camp road where the other cabins aren't. Now, the closest one was a short walk away, but it wasn't like running across the street or next door or anything, and not visible behind the trees and brush. Anyway, The closest cabin was far enough away that there was no other reason for two guys to be out there smoking. I nudge V and say there's two guys there, and she says it's a deer asleep. Now my boyfriend at the time had basically brought me all of REI to go on this trip. Our guide had asked us to bring a large knife and had brought a nice hunting knife and also a little camp hatchet. I don't know what I'd been able to do, to be honest, but I grabbed both and just huddled to the window waiting in the dark. Suddenly a car alarm goes off and all the cars were parked in the front of the house. Groans came saying, "Come on, get the alarm off, who's that?" And I said, "I think it's mine," and found the fob and turned off the alarm. There's silence and we wait. The car alarm goes off again now. The girls lost it and say, "Shut up with your car." Now, I finally crawl to V. I say, "V, there are guys out there. I think they're messing with the car of the other girl." And she says, "It's a deer. Go to bed and leave me alone." Okay, then the car alarm goes off again and they shout at her to turn off the car alarm. Now, A eventually comes down the little ladder thing. I went up to her and whispered, "Hey, there's two guys out there and no one believes me. They're just saying it's a deer. But I saw them smoking in the back. You can't go out there alone. I'm going out there first with the lantern so at least we can see around the cabin." So we put the shoes on and I turned on the lantern and opened the door and walked onto the porch with the lantern in my left hand and hatchet in my right. I hung up the lantern on a little hook on the porch. It was very bright and lit up the whole clearing in front of the cabin and the whole parking lot for the cars. For at least a moment we can't see anyone there. I tentatively walked towards the front door and walked around the car, trying the handles. No alarm went off as she tugs them. "See, it wasn't a deer," I said. "Even with you trying to get into the car while it was locked, no alarm. Your alarm's not sensitive, someone's trying to get in." We go back into the house and lock the door behind us, turning off the lantern, and sat inside the dark waiting for our eyes to adjust. A told me that she hadn't been able to sleep well and had been lying awake in the dark in the loft, feeling uneasy. I told her I wondered if somebody had tried to lure her out there alone in the dark and had been spooked off when the two of us came in with an extremely bright lantern. We then stay there, quietly chatting together in the dark for hours, waiting to see if anything else would happen, but the alarm doesn't go off again. And finally, enough time's passed that we decide to go to bed. The car alarm was quiet for the rest of the night. That was our last night there, so in the morning we pack up and I drove back with A. Now, if a zombie apocalypse were to happen, I pick A for my team because she was listening to her gut and worked with me as a team to keep everyone safe. I'll keep this short and sweet, but this happened a few years back. We're having a brutally cold winter. The snow had frozen into ice and covered everything. It was pitch black in the backyard, and when I went to let my dogs outside one last time before bed that evening, as we exited the house from the sliding door for the walkout basement and onto the lower deck, I felt that something's off. Our house backs up onto some woods, so I was accustomed to hearing noises from wildlife in the night time, but this is different. Nothing made a sound except the Arctic cold wind, but I had a feeling that I'm being watched. The entire time my dog was in the backyard. I looked around nervously, expecting a coyote or some other kind of predator to pop out of the tree line. My dog does his business, but afterwards stopped and stared to the corner of the woods until I actually get scared and call him back inside. He hurries back. I quickly lock the sliding door and shut the curtains, unable to shake the uneasy feeling of which I'm having now. After double and triple checking all the locks in the house, I go to bed. Around 3 in the morning, I now hear the muffled sound of my dog barking from the basement 2 floors below. I got up, stumbled down 3 flights of stairs, and found him standing in the basement. He was peeking his head through the closed curtains, barking his head off with the hair standing up all along his back, Now, I try calling him away from the door, but he won't let up, which is weird. I dreaded peeking out the curtain to see what he's barking at after the uneasy feeling I had earlier in the night. Finally, I hold my breath and swipe the curtains aside. I peer into the inky blackness but see nothing to cause alarm, and a wave of relief washes over me. Now I figured that it must have been a deer or raccoon in the yard that set him off. He whined at the door for a few more minutes until I bribed him upstairs with a cookie for dogs. I went back to bed and wasn't disturbed again. That is, until the morning when I went into the basement to let the dog out. I opened the sliding door and walked out onto the deck as he bounded into the snow. My blood ran cold as the sub-zero morning temperatures pierced when I looked down. But there, frozen into the deck, were a set of bare human footprints which are very clear. I can make out each toe on the person's footprint. The prints were large and appeared to be from an adult male. Looking around, I noticed that they started at the deck, went to the sliding door, then towards the basement living room, then disappearing off the side of the deck. I had my snow boots on, so I walked around but couldn't find any other trace of the footprints. Keep in mind, the daily temperatures are around 0, never above it, and the wind chill made it feel close to 20 below. Frostbite would have literally set in within a matter of minutes for anybody out there, especially in the dead of night. Now, I've never experienced anything like it since. My father is a park ranger, and even when he was off duty, he still liked to take me on trips out into the great wilderness. We went to quite a few different national parks, but something that I'd like to share with you is a rather strange experience that we had while we went on one camping trip during the summer. Now, we were planning to be out here for about 4 days, and this is during the summer break. It meant that a lot of different places were very busy, but my father, having the career that he did, knew one that would be a very quiet place we could go to, and I was all up for it. At the time, I was doing okay in school, but I didn't really know what I wanted really. At the time, I was pretty sure I was going to end up in the military, but it didn't happen for a few reasons. But because of this at the time, my dad thought it would be a good idea to take me out into the woods just to get accustomed to being outside. It made a lot of sense, and obviously you're going to spend time camping out if you're in the military, so it was a pretty good idea, we thought. I did have some summer school things that I needed to do which were coming up, and I really didn't want to do them. I don't know, the idea of summer school just never really made sense to me. The way that I'd look at it is that you're on summer vacation for a reason, and you shouldn't have to do more things in between. I think it should be a time that you can really rest and recover, but my mum didn't think so. Again, I think my dad understood this, and that's why he was quite willing to take me on a nice trip I could enjoy. There's a number of different things we had planned for this particular trip. Now, on the first day we set out just for a nice hike to see the views. We had all of our camping gear with us in some old military rucksack things, my dad carrying the most. Now, during the first day, we saw a couple of people around, but I realised that the further we went, the less and less they would become. Now, this is a good thing for me because I kind of wanted to escape people a bit. It was a really good experience, and I had a good time bonding with my father over this. Now, eventually it gets closer to nightfall, and we decide that we're going to try some night fishing. It's something that I haven't done before, so I'm quite excited to do so. We eventually make it to the campground that my dad had picked out for us, so I'm pretty happy to be there and put the stuff down. My dad shows me where we can do the fishing and sets up everything and gives me a headlamp. Now, while this is happening, I haven't really done fishing before, so I'm pretty much at a loss as to how exactly I'm supposed to do this, so every 5 minutes that I haven't caught anything, I put my headlamp closer to the water looking for the fish, obviously scaring them off, and I constantly move my fishing reel around thinking that's going to make a difference, but again, it probably just scares them off. I don't know. I was more worried about hurting my hand on the fishing reel. My dad seems to be gone for quite a while though, but it doesn't really bother me at the time because I'm too caught up in trying to do the fishing. While fishing, I can hear some water disturbance. It's not close, but I definitely notice it, and I face my head up, trying to shine my lamp towards it, but obviously I can't see that far. The torch isn't that powerful. Now I can just about make out the silhouette of something in the water before it disappears down again, and I think, wow, that must have been a really big fish. Now, something strange that happened while doing so is, out of my peripheral vision, I realised that a plant has just moved, like somebody's gone over and touched it. Now again, there's no one around but myself and my dad, and I know it's not my dad, so I'm a little bit unsettled by this. Now, I do think maybe it was just some kind of animal, so I don't think too much of it. I try and cast my fishing reel as far out as I can now. I just about do so, and my dad eventually arrives and says, "Godson, you know you took me out with that. You have to be careful," and shows me how to do it properly. And my dad's actually doing fishing properly. We didn't eventually find anything, but he tells me not to shine the light down because it scares the fish and that you kind of want to stay still. I tell him that I'm sure there was a large fish that disturbed the waters further up, but he tells me the fish shouldn't be big enough to really do that, because I said it was similar to a person, but I think my dad dismisses this. Now it starts to get quite cold, so we head back to our campsite and settle in for the night. And it's a pretty good night. My dad was reading a book and I wasn't really sure what to do with myself, so I just started drawing some things. It's something I'd done when I was a lot younger. I don't actually do drawing anymore, but I'm pretty good at kind of like the cartoon sketches for some reason. I guess I used to draw The Simpsons and SpongeBob or something like that, but I think that's the reason that I have kind of a knack for it. And my dad was pretty impressed with my drawings. I just drew some of the forest and tried to draw the thing that I'd seen in the water earlier. Well, not necessarily the thing, but the way the water was disturbed and the plant moving. It felt like the right thing to do at the time. And that was that. We eventually fall asleep and wake up for the next day. Now on the second day, we weren't actually leaving this spot, and we were just going to do some more hiking around. My dad took me to one place, and my god did it have a beautiful view there. Everything looked so pristine and beautiful, and at the time it cemented into my mind that I wanted to be a military person, because I thought, well, I'm just going to be seeing things like this all the time, and for that I was incredibly excited. Now my grandfather and his grandfather are in the military. We're kind of from a military family, so I thought it was going to be good to follow suit. Now, eventually this day comes to a close and nothing too much happened. The following morning we pack up and we're ready to go on to the last part of this, get into the last campsite, the third one. Now the hiking to get to this one wasn't too bad really, and again I was pretty pleased to go out there. I don't know why, I just felt good the whole time and it was a lovely experience. Now we get to the campground eventually and settle in for the night, and this is when things get a bit weird. I'm awoken by the sight of somebody outside the tent. I can just about see the silhouette. I say "Dad," and then realise he's not there, and I quickly unzip the tent. I can see my dad holding the hunting knife and torch in the other, pointing at someone. I say "Dad, Dad," and he says to stay still, son, and my dad screams at somebody to get back now. Because of how bright it is, and obviously I've just come out of the dark tent, my eyes haven't adjusted, but I quickly go and grab my headlamp and turn that on, and I can see somebody covered in blood there holding a knife, just staring at me and my dad. Now, what was really crazy is what happened next. He turns round, throws himself into a tree, then gets up again, and repeats the process. He stares at us for probably 10 seconds before going up to the exact same tree near our campsite, throwing himself at it, then coming back again. I realised that he's dropped a knife and constantly picks it up, and he hasn't cut himself, and the blood and stuff is just from the tree. But what on earth is he doing? Now this gone on for a good 10 minutes before my dad tells me to start packing up everything. I quickly do so, and I didn't feel too scared in this moment because having my dad there with his knife made me feel like the safest person in the world. Now, we eventually get all of our stuff together, and I kid you not, the whole time this guy was constantly doing this same thing over and over again. I've never seen anything like it, and not even to this day I haven't. We eventually get our stuff together, and my dad tells me to hold his hand and to lead the way back. Now this is a big responsibility at the time because I haven't really been camping like this before, and I'm not certain I know the way back, but my dad tells me that he's not going to look back until this guy's out of sight. Now I do constantly glance back, and my dad tells me not to because he can see when I'm doing it because of the light, and he knows how scared I can get sometimes. But I asked my dad what's happening, and he said that the guy's constantly doing this same thing over and over again, until eventually we're at a point where my dad can take over and tells me to do the same. My dad's walking incredibly quick, and eventually we make it back. My dad quickly makes a call to the police and reports what's happening. I'm confused as heck, and eventually we get back into the car and drive home. Now it turns out that what happened, and this is something I only learned after my dad told me after a number of years, is that the police found that guy there. Apparently, he had stabbed somebody and then taken some kind of mushroom that gives you a repetitive motion syndrome or whatever it's called. And that's why he was throwing himself at the tree. Apparently he was completely out of his mind, but they managed to capture him. Now if it wasn't for that mushroom making him repeat his motions, he could have easily continued to progress towards us and probably just stabbed us in our tent. But thank God he didn't. In 2020, my mum, 60s female, and I, 30s female, decided to go on an overnight camping trip together on the Oregon coast. I picked what looked like a pretty campsite from a campsite app and we went off. When we got there, we realised it's right off the highway, but there were enough trees and a fence up that you couldn't really see the road. But the gate was just a metal gate that swung into place with no locks. There was a house on either side, but the property was fenced in on both sides. We pitched a tent pretty far back close to the woods on the property. The closest house was about 100 yards away, and the highway was about 200 yards. But then again, it was mostly fenced in and surrounded by firs. It's a lovely campsite, and my mum raved about how beautiful the place was. I will say that I got a feeling of dread as soon as we walked onto the property, but we arrived late, and I didn't know we'd be able to get a new spot quickly. My mum could tell I was nervous, but for some reason I put her enjoyment of the beauty of the campsite over my feeling of dread. We made a nice campfire and enjoyed some hot chocolate as we watched the fire. I keep an eye out and didn't see or hear anything too odd. IRC. My mum went to bed before I did and stayed up and watches the fire for a long time before going to bed. Finally, I tuck in very exhausted from staying up. At about 2 a.m, I awoke to twig snapping and what sounded like somebody dragging their fingers on the side of the tent. Up to the front, I sat up, grabbed the phone and the only weapon I had, a flashlight, and unzipped my sleeping bag in case I need to fight anyone. There was a full moon that night and I couldn't tell if it was a person's shadow falling on the tent or if a tree branch shadow was moving from the wind. It sounded like there's two people outside trying their best to be quiet. We had brought our books and boots inside and there was no indicator of anybody being out there. It felt like they were trying to gauge the tent that I was in while listening for what they were. I had made sure to make enough noise so they knew somebody inside was alert, but no more than that. If they knew someone is awake, They can't surprise us, but they also don't know who is inside or whether we have guns or not. I sat there in the dark until dawn. My mum slept through the whole thing. When we got up and out of the tent, small things had been moved. Our camp chairs had cup holders. One cup had been in the cup holder which was on the ground. A pen that had been in a cup holder was also on the ground now. My mum raves about how good her sleep was and how refreshing it was to camp there, so I didn't want to burst her bubble or scare her. We packed up and I didn't tell her, but let her have a nice memory of deep rest and relaxation while camping on this beautiful property. Was it someone living in the woods? Someone walking down the highway in the middle of the night, or God knows who? My mum got a great experience and I got a refund and a fear of camping. The property owner said that they might actually set up cameras now just to keep an eye on things for the future. Now it's really the people out there that scare me more than anything. I don't like the way that they're acting so misconspicuously and trying their best not to be heard. That's what creeps me out, and why would they go through our stuff? Now I work as a childcare professional, and one of the kids that I look after had recently gotten into hiking. I decided to take him into a really cool trail in the Salt Fork State Park. We were all set up to hike to the Hoss Cave after parking right near the beginning of the trailhead. The entire trail was about half a mile, which is why I say I chose the trail for our hike that day. I also chose this trail because any time that I had been on it before, it was busy and full of people and a very popular site, which makes me feel very secure. However, this past summer, we had a cluster of 7 summer storms which causes massive damage to the trail, so to my surprise, it was much more difficult and completely empty. I wasn't bothered by the trail being obviously empty because there was a small construction crew working on a bridge that was just barely visible from the trailhead. He was still up for the hike, despite the entire width of the trail being washed out until it was no more than a foot or so wide, with a 6 foot to 12 foot drop off into a creek bed. There's then a solid rock and several miles of trees. Now he's very athletic, and I was confident in his abilities and he was so excited to tackle our adventure. We made it all the way to the platform that allows you to see the entire cave. Now there's many trees which are surrounding the platform, and it was actually closed at this point, but we made it this far and we decided to maneuver around the platform and proceed a few hundred feet into the cave. We spent the most time in this area due to difficulty, so I knew exactly what it looks like. There were tree roots directly under the platform and you could climb down on either side of them. It's also worth noting that the cave is much more like a cliff with an overhanging rock formation and a trickle of water directly in the middle. It's not a creepy closed up cave, it's very open and beautiful. We got to the cave and I noticed a candle that was not burning recently, but had been at some point sitting on a large rock and had a heart caved into it. I chalked it up to somebody having a date or something and disregarding it. He wanted to climb to the top when I noticed 2 more candles and 3 stacks of small rocks that had been stacked up by someone. It definitely felt weird at this point, but it was about this time that he found a small puddle full of baby salamanders and wanted to catch them. It was the happiest that I've seen him in a very long time, and I didn't have the heart to tell him that we have to go. We spent about an hour catching baby salamanders, and I watched him have the time of his life. We finally decided to leave, and when we got to the platform, dead center in the middle of the tree roots was a wet washcloth hanging in there, which was absolutely not there before. He noticed it as well, but didn't pick up on the severity of the situation of which we're in. At that moment, I actually knew 2 things. 1, someone's watching us, and we didn't see them, and 2, They were potentially hiding in the woods and made a point to not be seen but to leave an object to be noticed. There was no running back with the narrow trail, and I was not about to tell him that we're in potential danger. I told him to go out in front of me, and I just encouraged him basically and say we're doing great over and over, and that speeds him up naturally. I never saw anyone until we were on the trail. We got to the car and I locked the doors immediately. On our way out of the park, a very dirty man, probably in his 30s, came out of the woods and just stares at me, absolutely void of emotions. That man completely follows me until I'm out of sight with his eyes, literally like a serial killer stare. Now, I knew the third fact at that point, that he made a point to make himself apparent, and that's the one that kind of scares me the most. That stare actually stuck with me for days, and I considered cancelling after that as it bothered me for several weeks, causing anxiety. I tried to tell myself that maybe we interrupted his bath time and he didn't want to startle us. After all, he could have just been out there and watching us catching salamanders waiting to go. But I just cannot rationalise why he stared at me like that and wouldn't move. Deep down I know that it was probably a deliberate scare tactic or something. He never had any idea how panicked I was though, my boyfriend. It was the most fun that I've ever seen him have. He brings it up on a regular basis as a very positive experience, but for me, it was not good and I feel very disturbed. This story happened when I was about 15, so many years ago. Now, during the summer, I'd been doing quite a lot of house sitting. That was for my grandfather's property that he owned, out in the middle of nowhere, truly in the backwoods. He literally had neighbours nowhere to be found, and I found that quite interesting. Eventually he had to move out of there because it was too isolated, and living on his own, anything could have happened to him and he would have been miles away from help. I think it would have been quite hard to describe where his property was to anyone that needed to go there in case of emergencies, but I still have fond memories of being there. The property wasn't too big, but it was just enough, and the scenery was beautiful. Now where he lived, it actually had a really nice small lake next to it, and the water was always clear. The trees here were very big too, and very green during the summer, and I guess it was just a beautiful place to go generally. It could get extremely cold in the winter, but we wouldn't go there often during that time. Now on one particular day, my mum and dad were going to take my grandfather out to have a nice meal and whatnot, and they would be gone for most of the day. That meant that I had to do some house sitting. I got some money out of it and I didn't mind, and I was just up for being out there on my own. I was getting to the age where I started to not enjoy living with my parents because I didn't want to be nagged all the time and constantly made to do different things. So I found the whole thing very nice. The main job I had was just to enjoy myself, and that's what I did. I arrived to the property and say my goodbyes to my grandfather and my mum and dad, and I watched the car slowly peel off with a slight dirt trail behind it. They tell me not to go outside very much because it could be dangerous, and I agree, but of course I didn't listen. So I head out and immediately I decide to go over to the lake. It was a really nice area that you could sit at, and you could even try some fishing, but I'd literally never caught anything, so I wasn't up for that today. I just took my shoes and socks off and let my feet dip into the water and would just twirl them around and relax. At this time of the year, the water wasn't actually that cold too, so it was another thing that I really liked. Now, I did this for a while and just took in all of the scenery. There was some cloud cover, but it wasn't enough that you couldn't get some sunlight on your skin that made you feel all nice and warm. So I was pretty content here. I stayed here for probably about a good hour or so before it started to look like it was gonna rain, and I decided that I should head back. Now, I head back, and while walking, there's some light rainfall which makes me increase my pace, but while walking, I can't get over how beautiful the place is. I didn't feel like I was trapped here. I kind of felt free and very privileged to be able to see everything like this. Now, I'm not too much further from home, and decide to stop. For whatever reason, I just had the feeling that I needed to be out for longer. So I head back the way I come, and luckily the clouds go and it's much more sunny now. I'm walking on this little path that's mostly usable, but there's some large rocks that I have to watch out for. There's one tree that's fallen up ahead of me, but it doesn't bother me, and I continue walking. I remembered thinking that I really wish I had my brother here, or someone that could enjoy it and appreciate it like I did, but he was usually too busy with his girlfriend, and he would quite often go off to do his own thing. I learnt later that he actually wanted to do more with me, but I didn't learn that at the time. So I was just here to enjoy it as much as I could. I was also learning to enjoy being on my own and not always need the company of others, but I did kind of miss it. I'd gone quite a long way. It was so much so that I actually become hungry again, and eventually I decided that I should loop back and just cut this to an end. Now I make my way back inside, and what do you know, I could not have timed it better. As soon as I get in and close the door behind me, I can now hear that it started to rain, and it was kind of nice because it made the whole experience very settling. Now, when I get inside, I do notice something odd. One of Grandma's dolls has been left out on the chair. I realise that my grandpa must have done this because it looks quite funny, but it's one that I hadn't realised was there before. It looks quite old and a little bit creepy, but I decide just to leave it there. I can put it away later, and I don't want to get in trouble for doing so right now. Now, I was pretty bored for the first couple of hours and actually drifted off asleep before waking up again. Now, while waking up, I realised that somebody's at the door. They haven't rang the doorbell or anything, but I can just see that somebody's standing there. They look pretty small, and I realise that it's probably a kid there, and I slowly make my way up. I then open the door thinking that it's one of my siblings that my parents have dropped here, and that maybe they've got to see me too, forgetting that I'd fell asleep for a while. I then realise that it's not a person, it's a doll. It's just standing propped up. I realise that it's on a stick and it's got some rocks keeping it in place, but it's just there like it's about to enter. I think this is extremely odd and take a step outside. I look around and can't see anybody, and quickly do a jog around the perimeter. That's when I realise it. There's about 10 doll heads all scattered around the outside of the property, and it gives me chills. I start worrying that my grandpa has something wrong with him that we haven't noticed, and I think, God, the isolation's probably really got to him, and maybe these are his friends, or he thinks they are, but that doesn't explain how the doll got there. I think maybe there's a rational explanation for this, so I just move it to the side with the other doll heads and go back inside. Now, I genuinely completely forgot about them being there, and don't ask me how, because in retrospect, this kind of creeps me out. But I just relax for a while and read a book and get lost in it until I get a call off my parents saying that they're gonna have to come over the next day, and how am I doing? I say that's fine, and they say there's some really bad traffic, so Grandpa's just gonna stay with them. And again, I've got no issues with this. Now, I eventually go about my evening and go to bed, and wake up the next morning. I really slept for a long time, because I wake up and my parents are pulling up on the driveway, and I run over and say hello, all excitedly. I ask how their day was, and they say it was pretty nice, just took them hours to get back home. And that's when my dad says, "What's that?" and spots it. I say, "I don't know. I didn't know Grandpa had this," and my grandpa gets out and is equally as confused, saying that he doesn't have any, and that's not Grandma's. I then say, come, look, I thought it was really weird yesterday. I thought you did this, Grandpa. And originally I thought he was lying, but now there's about 16 doll heads all around outside, randomly scattered throughout the property. And my grandpa looks a little bit confused and somewhat angry. At first he thought I'd scattered grandmas around trying to scare them, but I say no, I haven't, and I quickly go inside and realise that all of my grandma's 3 dolls are still there. That's when we realise something's really strange. Why are there doll heads here, and how long have they been there for? My grandpa says that he's certain that he didn't see them the other day when he was doing some yard work, so that poses a question. Who put them there and why? We search around the property and actually go quite far. I ended up going off closer to the lake again, trying to look for anything. Another doll or a person, but I can't find anyone. I eventually head back and my mum starts really panicking. I then explain that one of them was on the chair, and that's enough. My mum quickly gets all my stuff and my grandpa's stuff too that he needs, and she says that he's going to stay with us for a while. We quickly search around inside the property and can't see anything, and we lock up everything, and I watch the house slowly disappear in the distance. Now it took another good 3 or 4 months before eventually my grandpa went back there, and that was without incident. My dad had collected all of the doll heads into a trash bag and disposed of them. Turns out we never got to the bottom of what actually happened that day, and sometimes I still have nightmares about seeing those doll heads. Now, I've always been interested in the paranormal and unexplained ever since I was a young kid, after having what I now believe to be an experience with a black-eyed kid, but that's a story for another day. This one takes place when I was about 15 or so in the middle of Tennessee. Back then, I was going through my edgy phase, as we all do, and I thought it would be cool to go into the woods alone to blow off some steam, and why not? I spent a lot of time with my grandma as my dad worked 6 days a week, and I didn't feel comfortable being left alone at home since it was kind of a sketchy meth head town, whereas my grandma lived in a relatively nicer area. She owns a good few acres of land, and if you go far enough into the woods, there's this really beautiful waterfall that leads to an underground spring. So one day, I was going back there trekking the land I knew like the back of my hand at that point, enjoying the peacefulness and wilderness and everything it has to offer. After going uphill for a bit, it starts downhill and there's this clearing that takes you straight to the waterfall. Watching my feet as I walk, always cautious as to not step on a copperhead, I came down the hill into a clearing. Right at the bottom of the hill, I see something. It's unusual and catches my eye. It took me a second to realise what I was staring at, but it was the skeleton of a deer, like freshly killed. Now normally I wouldn't think too much of this, but something felt off. There was no rotten skin or signs of flesh anywhere. These bones still had flesh and blood on them, but no signs of skin or anything. My young teenage mind tried to process this, and I couldn't think of any predator in that area that could have just stripped a deer like this. The other thing is, no hunter would really be able to do this. Now, this is not an area where hunters are known to hunt to, or really supposed to be. The moment I realised this, a very strong sense of doom washes over me, and it's almost an impending one, and my fight or flight kicked in. It felt like the trees and everything around me was shaking, like something was moving fast towards me, so I took off and ran as fast as I can, not even looking behind me, because I can sense I'm being chased. I hear the twigs and sticks breaking under the weight of something behind me. It sounds heavy too. I don't think I ever ran so quick in my life. Once I'm out of the woods, I make it back to roughly where my grandma's is, and get into the backyard, and suddenly a feeling of safety washes over me. I don't know what was in those woods that day, but needless to say, I didn't hike back there or go back there on my own ever again. In the late 90s, when I was about 12 years old, I went to a summer camp at Robbers Cave in Oklahoma. Our cabin was filled with bunk beds in big open space, so I had a top bunk. One of the nights I was there, I woke up suddenly in the middle of the night to a sound outside of my window. My head lay opposite from the window, so when I sat up, I was staring directly outside into the woods. Through the grass, I see a glowing green object in the shape of a person. I couldn't see a face, but I could feel it staring at me. The ordeal lasted for what felt like a minute of us staring at each other. I remembered I began feeling sick to my stomach, and the next thing I remember was waking up the following day. I've tried as rationally as I can to figure out what it was, or think maybe it was a dream, but it really felt different to me and was too vivid. The experience was so jarring that I've had recurring dreams about seeing this thing ever since, but for whatever reason, none of them feel like that first one that I had. No, I grew up on a ranch. My dad owned a small single-wide trailer. We were neighbours with my Tia and Tio. They were around 100 yards to the left of us. The back of our trailer was placed really close to thick woods, so I didn't really have a backyard. We were kind of plopped right in the middle of the woods, but our driveway was connected to the main dirt road, if that makes sense. Well, I always felt creeped out about the backyard area and our back door. Like I said, we didn't have a backyard. It was a heavy, uncleared wooded area. We never used the back door. It was always locked with one of those chain locks on the inside. I was a very active kid. I couldn't ever sit inside and chill. I always had to be outside exploring. Usually my cousins and I would explore the ranch, build forts and ride four-wheelers, but there were times that I would go exploring alone. I remembered there was one time I was looking around the trailer alone trying to find a good spot to build a fort. I was around 8 years old at the time. I went to the end of the trailer to explore. This area had a large area of cleared brush, but behind me was the backwood area. Now I can remember walking around focusing on finding a good fort spot when suddenly I feel really uneasy. My attention immediately went to the backwood area. It felt like someone was staring at me. The feeling was so intense. I booked it to the back of my house. I don't remember any other details about that experience other than feeling like somebody was there staring at me. There was another time where I came home from my cousin's house to get some clothes since I was staying the night with her. So it's around 9 p.m. My cousin's driveway connects to the main dirt road in the same area as my driveway. Anyway, when I open the front door and walk into the trailer, I noticed the back door was completely open again. I was staying at my cousin's house and my dad was down the road at a local bar. There was no one at the trailer for hours. My dad never opened the back door ever for any reason. I immediately felt very spooked and hightailed it back to my cousin's house without getting the clothes I initially went there to pick up. There's many other weird things that my cousins and I have experienced on the ranch, but this experience is by far the most alarming for us. It was during the summer of '07. We were at my cousin's house. My dad took us to Hollywood Video earlier that day to rent a movie. This was what he did to make up for being out late. Now, we ended up renting Texas Chainsaw Massacre and decided to watch it at about 1 a.m. We chose to rent this movie and watched it at a time because we love to get spooked. Well, after finishing the movie, it's about 2 a.m. and we still want to party, so we decide that we'll walk to my trailer and pick up the boombox and listen to our CDs we just burnt on a website. Remember, my cousin's driveway is connected to the main road parallel to where my driveway was. We get to walking, and out of nowhere, we hear a chainsaw going off in the hill about 40 or 50 yards to the left of us. Way too close for comfort. Again, this is 2 AM in the middle of nowhere. All of the land surrounding us is owned by a close family. None of them would ever opt to clear/operate a chainsaw at 2 AM in the pitch black. We actually have to use a flashlight to see the dirt road in front of us. That's how dark it was. When we heard the chainsaw, we all paused and looked at each other super confused. Once we processed what we're hearing, we run as fast as we can to my trailer, only because at that point, it was closer than my cousin's house. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't home. He was out doing whatever he was doing, so we couldn't tell him about what we just heard or ask for a ride back to the cousins. We ended up grabbing my loaded .22 and walking back with it in hand. Luckily, we didn't hear the chainsaw again. Now, to this day, my cousins and I are perplexed over this experience. There's no logical explanation to this chainsaw that we heard at 2 AM. In a weird way, it almost sounded like a very loud recording of a chainsaw, rather than an actual chainsaw. Again, none of my family would wake up at 2 AM and start clearing or doing anything, so it's weird. Or why would they play the sound of one for no reason? And I feel especially weirded out because we'd just watched the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Even though we were trying to get spooked, we didn't want it to be in this way. None of us are expecting what we heard. We all heard it clear as day at the same time. My cousins and I told our family about this experience on a few occasions. My family's response is always weird. My dad got short with us and said, well, you shouldn't have been out at that time. Now, I don't really know what to think of it. Now, my father grew up in rural Idaho in the 70s and 80s, and the ranch is surrounded by about 1,000 acres where he has no neighbors. Now, one night, my grandparents left my father and his foster brother home alone while they attended an event in a larger city. Usually this is fine. The house is miles away from the road, so visitors were always expected and known in advance. It wasn't the sort of place that strangers happen upon. My dad was walking down the hall and happened to pass the back door, which has a large window directly next to it. He was horrified to see a man's face pressed against it and staring at him. He didn't recognize the man. Then he and the man actually stare at each other. Now, eventually the man moved away. My dad screams for his brother, and the both of them run upstairs to the front door. The front door is large and a sliding glass door that overlooks the driveway. In the driveway was an unfamiliar car with headlights on parked. Feeling trapped, they decide to call the closest neighbor they can think of. The neighbor agreed to come and check out the place, and they sat and watched the car park. And though they never saw anybody getting in or out of one, they watched the car that's there slowly drive and go away. Now, there are two bumpy dirt lanes that lead in and out of our ranch. One running north and the other south. They're both about a mile long. The neighbor that had seen the car had arrived from the south only a few minutes after the car pulled away, and the grandparents actually arrived from the north about the same time. Neither had passed the same car, or even seen a man walking around. In the years since, almost all my family has seen the car driving around the ranch, and few people have ever seen the man press his face against a window. Now, we have no idea who he is though. I grew up in a property that was really out of the way. It was literally like an hour drive just to find your next neighbour, and that had some advantages as well as some downsides. The problem was that if you didn't have a car, you're kind of stranded. And normally my parents would always have a babysitter whenever I was out. But at the time of this story, I was grown enough and trusted that yes, I could be in the property on my own if they needed to go out and do things. And I was a teenager, so I was more rebellious then. My father owned a rifle and I knew exactly where it was and how to open it with the key, so I always felt safe. Don't worry, I was trained by him and I knew all of the safety stuff, and I always thought of that if ever I went near that thing. Now on one particular day, my parents were going out for the evening. This was before cell phones, so I couldn't have called them if I needed to directly, but I knew that they had a landline that I could answer to, and I wasn't too worried really. They said that they're going to call around 10 at night just to check up on me before coming home at around 11. So I say goodbye, and I'm really happy here. It was kind of like one of those nostalgic summer days you remember when you're a kid, when you feel like you have all the time in the world to be at home and just do what you want, so I decided to go for a quick wander through the woods. I felt very happy, and I really enjoyed the fact that my parents were, yes, finally letting me do things as I wanted. It wasn't always as quick as I might have liked, but I didn't have a problem with it. I had some cool drinks with me as well that I'd bought from the store the other day with my dad. My dad said that I could treat myself and could also order pizza, so I was really happy. I had about $20 or so saved up and I was looking forward to using it. Before my dad left, he told me that I could use his own money, so it made it even better. I ended up going through the woods for a while and I didn't see anyone. I never did really. I wasn't even on a proper path, I just knew the area well, so enjoyed wandering around here. There was one kind of gate that you had to go through which is owned by farmers, but there weren't any there at the time. I make my way down to the area that I like to sit at, which is near some abandoned railway tracks. Long ago the trains come here, and long ago were any other people. So that's why I'm a bit confused. As I'm laying down, I'm sure I can see something white just further up ahead. I didn't know what I was seeing. It kind of looked like when you see spots in your eyes and they glow too brightly, because I only saw it for a second but it disappeared. I thought that was pretty odd and actually ended up standing up and kind of covering my eyes to see as much as I can. You know how if you kind of make like binoculars with your hands you can focus a bit? I was doing that, but it didn't seem to make much of a difference because I couldn't see anything. I presume that yes, I'm not seeing anything and decide that I should just head back now. It was a given that I was putting on a front, but I was feeling a lot less confident than when I walked in here. Not to worry, I just played some of my favourite songs and headed out, jump over the gate and head back to home. Now I eventually get back in and I feel pretty happy and content. I go to raid the fridge of some of the cool drinks that I had and I have them all in one. I realise, this is a bad decision because I wanted to save some to have with the pizza, so I just put the TV on to distract myself. Now I had it on pretty loudly and that's when I don't notice it at first. There's some kind of knocking coming. I quickly get up and go towards the door. I think maybe my parents have come home early, so I open it and say, "Hey Dad," kind of annoyed, but I realise no one's around. I can just hear the sounds of the TV in the background, so I just think that maybe it was on the TV and close the door. I head back inside and turn down the TV a little bit and order the pizza. They inform me that there's problems with the line and that they can't understand what I'm saying to make the order, and I keep saying, "No, please, I just need one large chicken pizza," again and again until eventually they hang up on me. Annoyed, I hang up my phone too, actually slamming it down. Really irritated because I can make my own food, but who wants to do that? I think there's better things that I can be doing with my time, so I go back to watching TV. Still irritated with the pizza place, I put it on a little louder than before. Now I get lost in the show that I'm watching and kind of half fall asleep. I'm awoken again by knocking again, and I'm convinced that it's my parents at home. I quickly get up and peer around the window, but I can't see anyone or anything. Again, this is pretty bizarre, but I try not to get too bothered by it, and just look at the time quickly, thinking maybe my parents have gone round to close the window or something. That's when I realise that it's only been about 10 minutes, and it's way too early for my parents to be back. I'm pretty tired now, but kind of orientate myself again, and decide to turn off the TV. I decide that I'm going to do some reading of some of my comic books now, because I've got all of the things at my disposal that I want to do. So I go and grab one, this time moving over to the kitchen. I start reading through them, and I have a feeling that there's something on the back of my neck. I keep trying to reach for it, but I can't seem to figure out what it is. At first I thought maybe it was like a spider's web that had fell onto me, or something like a hair, but I realise there's nothing there. And I also feel much more warm than earlier. Again, this is a pretty bizarre one, and I can't really figure out what it is, and I just kind of hope that my mum and dad come back quicker. I go to the phone to try and make a phone call to my parents asking how long they're gonna be. So I pick up the phone and I realise that the line is down. I can just hear a constant buzzing sound. I actually disconnect and reconnect it and keep on picking it up and down, but it doesn't make a difference. The line is absolutely funked. I think, God, this can't get any worse. To be honest, I was going to reattempt to buy pizza afterwards too, so I was getting annoyed. I decide instead that I should go and make a sandwich now. I make it back to the kitchen and make myself a sandwich. I go back to watch some more TV, and you're probably getting tired of hearing this now, but it was one of my absolute favourite things to do. I'd love to say it was a big learning experience, but it wasn't. But hey, I was young, so it was a thing to do. Now, while watching TV this time, I noticed there's something, and it doesn't bother me at all at first. Don't ask me why, but I was probably too engrossed in what I was watching. I realised that there's a figure on the patio which doesn't look right. I can kind of just see it out of my eye until I turn around and we lock eyes. I'm now staring face to face with someone who is freakishly tall, dressed in a clown costume, holding a knife. I don't know what to do, and we're froze locking eyes for what feels like a good 20 seconds or so, but it was probably only about 2 or 3. I realise that I've dropped my sandwich as I was eating, and my limbs have all went limp. I go to scream, but nothing comes out of my mouth. For a second I considered that it was my parents and maybe they thought it was funny, but I realised it's not possible. This person is much taller than my dad. Now, to describe this person, they look like they're in their 50s or 60s, caked in clown makeup, wearing a typical clown uniform, mostly dressed in yellow. I go to scream again and nothing comes out when the clown slowly raises its hand up and starts waving back and forth to me. The clown then gestures to be quiet as it slowly walks round to the other side of the house out of sight, still clutching what I think is a knife. Now, I did scream finally, and I actually scared myself with the tone of it. Almost on instinct, I rush over to where the gun is stored. I go to grab the key, and I can't find it. I punched the side and actually hurt my hand, but somehow this opened it. I thank God under my breath, and I quickly grab the rifle. My hands are shaking so much that I can't actually load it properly, and I ended up cutting my hand, which I'd already injured hitting this thing open, trying to put some ammo in. But that doesn't matter, I have lots of adrenaline now. I don't know where this clown is, and for some reason I decide the best thing I can do is open the window and start letting some shots off. Now, I could have very easily killed someone because I wasn't aiming, but I wasn't really thinking of that. I mean, God, I could have even hit my parents, but it's not worth thinking of. and I let out 4 shots outside the window. Now, this must have been enough to scare whoever that person is, because I go lurching window to window with my rifle in hand like some kind of spec ops soldier, and I don't see anyone. Now, I try again to call the police, call anyone, but the phone line's still down. I realise that all I can do now is just wait it out, and I quickly arm myself with all the ammo there is and go to the bathroom, locking the door. From here I have a point of view where I can see if my parents have come home or not. I just cock one in the chamber and wait there patiently. Now, my god, I thought it was about 6 hours, but it was probably only about 2, before I eventually see some lights coming up the drive and I realise that it's my parents. I scream, "Mum, Dad, come." My dad quickly sprints out of the car and my mum's just behind them, and I rush to open the door of the bathroom and sprint down. I bolt there and my dad says, "Jesus, why have you got that?" and takes the gun off me, quickly putting a safety on. I then explain that somebody's here and my dad looks furious, flicks off the safety and goes room to room searching. He searches the entire house and even around the perimeter when he realises that somebody's cut the phone line. My mum is very scared and all of us get into the car, only once my dad is certain that no one's here. My dad's asking me to describe the person and a look of absolute terror comes across him when I describe this person was wearing a clown outfit. I guess he had seen that killer from back in the day and maybe he thought it was someone inspired by them. I don't know, but eventually my dad gets over to the police station, screaming the whole time that he's gonna kill this person, he's gonna kill them. Eventually my dad puts the rifle down into the car because obviously he doesn't want to go into the police station like that, and we end up saying exactly what's happened. My mum's very shaken and we actually have to stay in a motel room for a number of months afterwards. My parents are not able to sell the property, but my mum also got a gun and I got my very own one after this. We were also never allowed to stay in there individually unless it was my dad on his own, but he never did that. We never found out who this is or what their intentions were, but unfortunately there wasn't enough forensics from where the line was cut. It's one experience that stayed with me and I think I'm never going to be able to lose it from my mind. I'm just incredibly grateful that I didn't freeze up, and God knows what would have happened to me if that had happened. Me and my family went on a short road trip a number of years ago. The time of this event was actually in the 1980s, so a good while before you had decent cell phones. We also didn't really have much in the way of satellite navigation back then, so it meant you basically had to rely on maps, and that wasn't always so easy. It was my dad, my brother and I on this particular journey, and me and my brother were acting as key navigators for my father. Now, to say that didn't go well would be an understatement, because we ended up miles and miles away from where we're supposed to be, and we basically ended up changing the place that we were going to camp at, just to make things easier. My dad wasn't that bothered though, and we settle into the area that we can park and camp. We did originally plan on setting up our tents, but it was quite late and we just settled down. We're figuring out what we need to do, and my dad suggests that we still make it to the other place because it was close to a beautiful national park and there was going to be lots we could see. We all agree with this and we settle in for the night. Nothing much happened, I just had a feeling that I couldn't sleep easily. When we woke up, someone who was dressed in a hat come over to us. It was clearly a park ranger who said something pretty weird to us. He said, "Hey, I'm gonna have to kick you out of here." We said, "Oh, sorry, we didn't realise this was somewhere we couldn't park or stay." And he said, "No, just you're not supposed to be here." Something about this person seemed really odd, and my dad gave him a funny look and quickly ushered us to get our things ready and drive away. Now, on the drive back, me and my brother kept asking my dad what was wrong and why he looked a bit unsettled, and he then said that there aren't supposed to be any park rangers out here. I thought that was pretty bizarre, but I thought, Maybe they've just expanded somewhere and we didn't realise it. I was pretty paranoid because, I don't know, I was young, but my dad seemed worse than me, and that was a bit worrying because my dad's a pretty strong person and I've never really seen him worry much before. Eventually though, we start making our way to where we're actually supposed to be originally. I don't know, it was kind of a good thing that we got there because I didn't want to spend another night in that place. You know when you feel like somebody's just going to linger around for a stupidly long time for no reason? Yeah, I kind of had the feeling that that was going to happen again. Now, to say this trip was eventful would be an understatement, as you're about to hear. Now, we eventually get to this place and my god, it's beautiful. I've seen some pretty good things in my time, but not much can compare to how beautiful this place was and my dad took us. I was really grateful for it and I found it a really nice adventure to have. I thought it was really funny what had happened earlier. My dad actually settled up a lot and we started to feel pretty good. So eventually we set up our tent and get ready to sleep. That was when it happened. We hear some screaming and it was really creepy. I don't know whether there was some kind of animals getting into some big fight outside, but that's what it sounded like. Until eventually it sounds just like there was some kind of human intervention. My dad says to wait here as he goes outside the tent and I can hear him talking to someone. The screaming sounds have stopped and I think this is pretty bizarre because my god did it sound like there was all hellfire earlier, so what happened? Me and my brother slowly emerged. I remembered it was very cold outside and my dad was saying to someone, no, just go away, and actually swearing. That's when I realised it was the same ranger that we had seen before. How on God's green earth had this person managed to get to the exact same spot as us again? It's not possible, I said to my brother and thought that maybe it was someone who just looked very similar, but this guy sounded exactly the same. Eventually this guy scurried off and my dad said something about being armed to him, and that seemed to make this person change their tone. They just slowly disappear into the trees like they weren't there before. Another weird thing that I noticed is that this person looks very tired and sweaty, almost like they've been in some kind of big fight, but with who? With what? That we just didn't know. Now, discussing it the next morning wasn't really an option because my dad was really focusing. From early in the morning, he'd gone round with his knife and was just patrolling the perimeter like he was looking for something. Me and my brother then say, Dad, what are you doing? And he just shakes his head and says, no, something's just off with that guy and I don't know why. I just can't stop thinking about it. We eventually all agree that we should move our campsite because we don't want to have our trip ruined by some weirdo, but it was really looking that way. So we now go a bit deeper into the woods. We eventually find another really safe place to go, and it's pretty cool. It's kind of up on a hill and you have a good vantage point here, so we're feeling a lot safer now, and we go about our day like usual. We've set up the tent and are getting ready for this night's sleep too. We're not too far from the end of our trip now, and we were actually enjoying it. However, this one particular night my dad just would not fall asleep. Eventually me and my brother do though, and we wake up the next morning and my dad looks like he hasn't had any sleep at all. I say, Dad, what's wrong? And he says, well, nothing. We then keep on pressing him to find out what had happened, and again, he doesn't say anything at first, until eventually he finally lets up on what happened. Apparently, all night he was sure that he could see the silhouette of someone who appeared to be dressed just like a park ranger, and it scared my dad a lot. We decide that we're going to man out the last night because again we're armed and we're at quite a good point here, but something just felt off about this person. So anyway, what happens? We go to fall asleep the next day and here we are again. Blood-curdling screams that you cannot seem to get away from, and it's really annoying because clearly this is some kind of animal out here and it will not stop making these weird sounds. But then again, we didn't really consider the fact that maybe, just maybe, this was people going at it and maybe trying to kill each other. Well, at least that's what my dad said, Every time we raised the alarm, he said, no, don't worry, just go to sleep. If anyone comes, I'll get them with my life. Now that reassured us a lot and we fall asleep again. Now everything's as it should be the next morning and we get our things together and decide to go. However, while leaving, we do realise something odd. There's blood, and a lot of it. It's only about a 4-minute walk from our tent, but it almost looks like somebody's had a massive sword fight. No, multiple people have had a big sword fight like back in the day. But where are the bodies? The amount of blood on the floor is honestly inhuman, and there must have been at least 1 or 2 more bodies. But nobody's around, and the smell, it smelled so bad. Honestly, like something we've never smelt before. And you can imagine we didn't stick around too long for this. My dad intelligently mentions that if this is what he thinks it is, then we don't want to put our forensics there. Forensics wasn't very advanced back then, but we weren't silly and keep it moving. My dad then goes over to the station to report what's happened, and that's when we see it. All kinds of police cars everywhere, and some law enforcement's coming to approach us. They tell us not to move and we don't, and my dad goes over to talk to them. I don't know exactly what he said, but they actually come and cuff him and us, and we have to go in to give some statements. They don't let on to exactly what's happened, but they just ask exactly why we're out there and what we're doing. Again, I didn't realise this until afterwards, but they actually interviewed all of us independently to make sure that our stories matched up. They asked for the exact spot where we camped, and my dad eventually leads them over there. Me and my brother have to stay with the police, who will not tell us what happened. Eventually though, after persisting, one of them opens up and says, you know, they found a few bodies out there? Me and my brother look at each other, terrified now. It was almost like we didn't want to accept that we'd just walked through a crime scene, but that was exactly what had happened. Apparently, there were reports of somebody imitating some kind of law enforcement or something, following people around, then getting them in the night. And apparently this wasn't the first time that it had happened out here. Now my dad comes back after a while and says, come on, let's go. None of us said a word to each other, as the police open up their tape and let us through. Now the drive back was pretty much entirely in silence until we pull up on the driveway, and my dad looks me and my brother dead in the eyes and tells us, hey, you don't tell anyone about what happened, alright? Especially not your mother. And we both agree with this, and that's that. So after doing some research later, it turns out that somebody would dress up like a police or park ranger and just try and look official in order to follow people around, and this person actually ended up murdering almost 4 people. It turned out we were camping in basically the exact spot where one of the murders took place, and there's a pretty strong chance that he was actually following us, but we were the lucky ones who got away. It still terrifies me. I mean, I don't think I'll ever get over this. In December of 2005, me and a few high school friends were back home from our respective universities. We were juniors at the time and started a tradition winter break of freshman year to visit random state parks / smaller towns and explore them, along with the occasional mischief that we would end up getting ourselves into. During these times, one-night trips, the 3 of us would all sleep in the back of my Tahoe on a large mattress pad. This kept us safe from the elements and set my paranoid mind at ease should we be subject to any foul play. We decided this year to go to the Davy Crockett National Forest area. This area has many places that are extremely rural and desolate, which was exciting because we had previously found some interesting things in abandoned structures on our previous excursions. I had used up the rest of my university printing credits to print detailed MapQuest pages for us to navigate while we were visiting. The drive was roughly 2 hours from our hometown, Conroe. We decided to start the trip off in Lufkin, just east of the National Forest, to eat dinner and get a few things from Walmart. After dinner, we decided to mess around and get into our shenanigans. A few hours later, We found ourselves in Crockett, Texas, about an hour west of Lufkin. We planned on staying in a campground about halfway between the two cities, so had a lot of flexibility when it came time. We explored random roads and went in a few abandoned buildings before getting bored and wanting to go somewhere else. By this time, it was 12:30 a.m. and at this point, I needed to get an energy boost. So, we decided to stop at a gas station in Kennard, Texas, which was about 30 minutes east of Crockett. I go inside and buy a few snacks, energy drinks, and a few cans of Skull to give us some fuel for the rest of the night, which is giving me a nice buzz. We decide to go a little more adventurous and venture down FM 357 south of Kennard. We come across a few Forest Service roads that veered off into rural residential roads and other country roads. I pull off on the side of the road to check the map quest and match the cross streets we're on at any given moment, with my two friends assisting the navigation. After getting back onto the road, I notice it's 1:30 a.m. and we all joke about how miraculously that we're still up. I decide to head down to the next service road we come across. This is where things start to get pretty weird, and where parts of my memory are erased due to sheer adrenaline that I had at the time. After driving down a few more service roads and taking random turns, we go to a road that is much more narrow compared to the others. By this time, I get incredibly frustrated. I mean, it's almost 2:15 a.m. and I don't want to stumble into someone's front yard in a rural area in the middle of the night. I decide to slow down, and suddenly, I noticed a faint light in the distance. Great, just great, I think. I thought about the chance of spooking some random soul awake, but about 30 seconds later, I can tell that these are headlights, but they suddenly disappeared. I thought somebody may have turned up ahead, but I was very wrong. About 10 to 15 seconds later, I see what appeared to be a brand new Chevy Suburban. The second I put my high beams on, its light turned on and three men dressed in suits jump out and sprint down the road past my car. It was almost like they were lifeless and didn't even notice me. As they're running past me, the Suburban suddenly shifts into reverse and conducts the fastest reverse maneuver I've ever seen. At this point, I unholster my G26 and tell my friend to grab my AR. We're all terrified and have no clue what we're about to come upon. As we drove forward, mind you, these were the days where cell phone coverage was literally non-existent in many areas of this state, so we had no way to call for help if anything happened. As we reach the end of the road, we come upon FM 357, the same road we originated from. But how is this possible, I thought. It felt like we're just venturing further and further away from the road, and we passed a US Forest Service fire station again on the way out like we had on the way in. I've recently checked Google Maps for any US Forest Service fire station off of FM 357 and can't find any current or past historical data for that. The county tax assessor does not have any listings either. We got back on the FM 357 and decided to book it downtown Crockett, as we did not feel comfortable with sleeping in a campsite after what just happened. I have since made sure to never venture down any unknown roads whatsoever, without at least referencing the GPS or map. I'm still processing that short but unsettling event. Where did those men come from? Why were they in suits in the middle of the forest, and where did the black Suburban go? Me and my friends actually still occasionally talk about the incident, and no one can come up with an explanation for what happened. The thing that bothers me is that I cannot find any evidence of this road that we're on. Google Earth doesn't have a satellite or any kind of image which lines up with the one that we're on, so this one and truly deepens the mystery of it all. So, this happened in 1989, I was with my boyfriend Eddie, his best friend, my older sister Angie, and about 6 other people. We'd spent the entire day mudding in the Royal Palm mudflats in Royal Palm Beach, Florida, aka the part of the Palm Beach County. I grew up in West Palm Beach. I had never seen anything like this before. After mudding all day, we decided to call it a night and leave. Almost everybody was gone by then, so we all piled into Eddie's truck and left. Eddie saw a small mud hole and drove through it, and we got stuck. The small hole was relatively deceptive. When I say we got stuck, I mean stuck for hours. I was pregnant with my first, so I was steering as the other 9 are pushing. The truck didn't budge. We had no choice but to wait until the morning for someone to come and tow us, as we're now completely stuck. It's about 5 AM. We decided we should just relax and try to sleep until someone come through. Eddie, I and his best friends are in front. My sister and other 6, who we are still friends to this day, pile into the back and start to settle down. We were still making noise when I heard a sound. It was a low grumble. I knew immediately that it was some kind of animal. I tell everyone to hush and listen. Then we all heard it, and it was getting louder and louder and more aggressive sounding now. Eddie has a KC light in his back seat, so he popped it out and lit up the night. That's when our world changed. 10 of us all see something ducking down and moving. Everyone was freaking out because it was clearly there. But what was it? Then it got annoyed, and this thing stood up and let out a roar that I can still remember 31 years later. It leapt through the large brush that it was hiding behind, coming straight towards us, and you can literally feel the shake with every footstep it took. It was 8 to 9 feet tall and broad. It looked like an extremely large man with hair, not fur. It had hair and lots of it. The KC lit it up, and you could see it clumping on the hair. The smell was rotten and sour, and being pregnant, I was extremely sensitive to smell, so it was bad. We had spent hours, we're talking 5+ hours, trying to push this truck out. They say adrenaline gives you super strength, and they're right. Eddie turned on his truck and starts pushing on the door frame. His bestie leapt out of his side and did the same. My sister and the others let out screams as they piled out, and then all you hear is this thing running and roaring. Everybody else was dead silent as they put everything they needed back and start pushing. With a sucking pop, that's all I can describe it as, we're out and we're throwing ourselves into the back as Eddie and his bestie just floor it. This is woods with tight turns, and we literally flew around those. It felt like the devil himself was after us. After we got out and onto the main road, we headed for a gas station to calm down and call our families. When we got there, we all got out, sat with our backs to the wall, and that was it. We never said a word to each other, just sitting there in silence. I think we were too raw, scared and in complete shock over what had happened. This was law. This wasn't real, so why did it exist? Because it was there. Anyway, after we called our parents and went home, one by one being dropped off, not a word was spoken. My sister and I did not discuss it until about 5 years ago, and we finally opened up about it and to others. It's kind of burned into my memory, and I don't know what it is, but it looked just like a Bigfoot. I was going on a road trip with my brother. I hadn't done so before, and we were both very excited to be doing so. We were going to drive across a few different states, and for that I was very excited. The destination was eventually getting to Canada, and that was really the highlight of the trip. We had such a good time when we eventually make it there, but however, During the trip there was one particular event that I don't think I'm ever going to forget. Now let me set the scene. We've been driving for quite a long time, and we didn't come across anywhere to fill up on gas. We also needed to get some more food and thing. I mean, we had enough of, as you say, proper food, but we wanted to get more snacks and stuff, and we're both getting a little bit tired. Now, both of us are pretty good drivers, and we didn't have an issue driving, even if we're a little sleepy, but as you know, that can be quite dangerous. So, we eventually find a gas station that looks pretty good, and we pull over there. We fill up on some gas, and we go inside the store and pay for the gas. We also look around and start getting some snacks and things, and I don't know why, the guy at the counter just felt pretty weird. He seemed nice enough at first, but for some reason, as soon as he heard we're out of town, he kind of changed and just stared at us. It was almost like it wasn't a real person and it was some kind of NPC put there. I don't know how to describe it, but the whole thing just felt a bit surreal. We eventually get the snacks as well and leave and tell him to keep the change, thinking maybe that'll make him more happy, but he literally doesn't react at all. We eventually make it back out, and my brother says, "Oh, I really need to use a bathroom," and quickly heads back. I say that I'm gonna wait, and he goes in the store, and this is what he tells me. Apparently the guy was staring at him the whole time back in and didn't say hello or anything when he re-entered. He said that he really needed to use a bathroom, and the guy said he'd show him, and apparently he led him to some really dodgy back area, and it looked like he was going to be trapped, and he said, "Yeah, the light's next to the toilet, you'll find it," and went and closed the door. My brother said that he just stood there completely bewildered and confused about what had happened, and he knew he wasn't going to go there. He felt like he was being set up. What's worst is he can quietly hear the door being locked behind him. Rather than panicking, my brother rather smartly went through an open window and come back to me. He quickly gets in and says, "Hey, let's just get driving." Now, we probably only went about a minute further down the road before the sky lights up a bit brighter. And then, a few seconds later, we're hit with a very loud explosion sound, and it makes me almost crash into a tree. We both look at each other confused as to what's happening, and honestly we thought that there was some kind of foreign force invading our country. After a number of minutes we managed to settle down and realise that this isn't the case. Now we decide that we're going to slowly head back and see what happened, and we're hit with how dark it is. We didn't have to turn around for long before we can see the burning embers where the gas station was. Thinking that guy's just blew himself to pieces in some kind of accident, we frantically call for the cops. We pull over and get out and decide that we need to go and see if he's okay, and that's when we see him. We can see the silhouette of him standing, staring into the flames about 30 meters ahead of us. We both looked at each other and slowly make it back to the car and start driving. We drove for another good 5 hours before eventually stopping, and we don't know what to make of it. Even to this day, we don't know whether that guy was setting up to kill my brother for whatever reason, but I just thank God that he managed to get out in one piece. I'm someone who's not actually from America writing this, but my similarity is that my father was a ranger of sorts, or our equivalent here. Now, I'm somebody who did something I didn't really admit to my dad originally. I used to love going exploring buildings and whatnot, and I'd always do this on my own, but sometimes with friends. I was pretty hesitant to tell my dad about it because I knew he would get really angry about it. I remembered him telling me stories about where he would get sent out to investigate abandoned buildings for homeless people, drug users, or God knows what, and you could see his frown on his beard, and he would just be really annoyed about it. But on the other hand, I was someone who loved to go exploring them, especially when I was young. Now sometimes I would go with my friends and we'd actually camp out overnight in them, and there was one particular incident that was like no others. Now, I'm not somebody who really believes in the paranormal or any of them things, but let me tell you my story. Now, we set out into the forest to go and explore some abandoned industrial type buildings. I'm not sure whether they were housing for the workers of the old factories, but they look really cool nonetheless. Now, one thing we knew is that we had to be really careful because of asbestos and whatnot, and most of us brought masks with us. Now, it was on and off snowing when we arrived at the place we like to explore, and it kind of made the whole thing seem like it was out of a movie, so that was really cool. We go inside the first abandoned building, and we're careful to make sure there's no squatters or anybody who isn't meant to be there. We literally had to go building to building, room to room, just to make sure we're the only people there. We decided on a room that we're going to camp in and put all of our equipment down. Basically, the choice was made easy by the fact that this area actually has a door, and you can close it, and also we can escape to a balcony if we really needed to. Now, we ended up going outside for a few minutes after putting our gear down and eating some food and having a really good time. We ended up going onto the roof just to enjoy the views and have a smoke. I mean, there wasn't too much to see, but we just wanted to try and catch the sunlight just before it faded away into the darkness. I'm standing there having a cigarette, having a good time with my friends, when I have a strange feeling like somebody's touching the back of my neck. I can't shake it and go to turn around to tell my friend to stop, and just off in the horizon, I captured the outline of a person staring at me. Now, they don't actually say anything at all, but I can just make out this person's very old and dressed in relatively dated clothing. It looks like they're wearing clothes from the 70s with the jumper and whatnot, but I think, oh, it's probably just a homeless person. I tell the others and say that I kind of want to go, but they're adamant that we should stay in there. I ended up putting out the cigarette and agreeing because I know they're probably not going to know what room we're actually in or not. So we end up going back into the room and we close the door up. We have a general tidy up and set up our sleeping bags and everything else that we need to camp in there. We ended up getting our small gas stove going and start making some more food again. We have lots of candles with us and I make sure I bring them because these are very important for heat. I light them one by one and my god, that place got really hot. We've got all the windows closed inside the area that we're in and you can really feel the heat. It's a good few degrees hotter where we are than outside, and this is important. But I know this will be an issue because when we wake up, the candles will have gone out and so will the heat. So I make sure that I'm packed in with nice and warm clothes. I realised that one of the candles has went out and I go to light it again. Just as I reach over, I can hear a rustling sound outside. I don't know what this is, but I go to investigate. I don't actually tell the others that I'm going because they're drinking a bit and they're not really bothered with what I'm doing. Now I look down into the darkness of the stairwell and decide this is not a good idea. I instead head up to the roof again to try and see what's around me. I get up onto there and I have a look round for the person I saw earlier, but nobody's there. Most likely this was just an animal that I heard. I ended up sitting there for a while, probably too close to the edge of the building to be considered safe, but I just want the peace for a few minutes. I'm here collecting my thoughts and I hear one of my friends whisper to me, "Watch out for the animals, kid. You could lose your life if you're not careful here." I turn around to speak to my friend and I realise nobody's there. I look to my right and quickly run over to the side of a block that's on top of the building. I say, "Hey, I know you're here," and stop mid-sentence as I realise I'm standing on the roof alone now. Now, I'm not entirely convinced or not whether I actually heard this or not, because maybe I was already a little paranoid expecting to hear something, but this was weird, and why was I addressed as kid? I was thoroughly freaked out, but I really don't want to scare my friends because I know if we come back at this time, my dad's going to know something's up, and I'm probably going to have to lose some of my expensive equipment here. So instead, I quickly go down. Now I have to go down about 5 or 6 stairs on the stairwell, and when I take my first few steps, I realise how cold it is and I really need to get in now. As I'm walking, I can hear my footsteps being traced behind me. Now, I was walking relatively quick, but I realised as I picked up the pace, the steps behind me also follow. Now for a moment it felt like I was in a nightmare where I'm on an endless stairwell being chased, but I didn't stop long enough to actually convince myself that this wasn't the case, and I just keep going. I'm not entirely sure whether it is my footsteps echoing or not, but they just seem slightly out of sync with me, if that makes sense. I eventually make it back, and funnily enough, my friends don't realise that I'm gone. They thought I'd just been sitting in the other room on my own, and I decided it's best not to say anything. Now we still have the candles glowing as everybody starts to drift off to sleep, but of course not me. I'm still pretty freaked out by what I saw and what I heard that day. My eyes are glued on the door. It didn't occur to me at the time, but we forgot to actually barricade the door, and it was almost half ajar. But I'm not joking, I was too scared to actually go and close it. I laid awake for another good 2 or 3 hours, half asleep, but just aware that something could happen when I hear a growling sound. Now, everything in my body was telling me this is some kind of demon and we need to watch out. But then I realised it was one of the most scary sounds you can hear out in the wilderness. It was the sound of a wolf. It sounds like it's close, maybe 1 or 2 floors below us. I very slowly and carefully get up, close the door and push a chair up onto it, and I remain still. And I'm certain I can see the silhouette of something moving past a window. Now it's a very inky silhouette, but I'm sure this was a wolf going past, slowly looking from room to room. I slowly edge my way backwards and call my friend Edgar, saying, Edgar, wake up, please. There's something wrong. And he slowly wakes up, saying, what's wrong? Why is it so hot still? He then says, God, why'd you wake me up? I say, stop, I think there's wolves. He suddenly darts up, realizing the danger. He quickly looks towards where I am and makes his way over, and we both see a dark, inky figure, roughly 3 feet high, come towards our door and sniffing sounds. This is then joined by another 2 or 3, and we can hear growling sounds again. My friend decides to knock on the window to try and scare them off, and we can hear at least 5 or 6 of them growl and then start to bark, and of course our other friends wake up. God, I don't want to die like this, I tell my friend. He says stop, and I quickly go and grab a knife. My friend then goes to grab another weapon and everything else we can find to defend ourselves with. Now we quickly move all of the things we can to barricade the door in, and my friend considers calling out for help, but that's a problem. If we make that call, we're probably going to get arrested and put others' lives in danger. Maybe we should just wait it out, my friend says. We're exploring the options now. We can go across the balconies and balcony hop, but it's pretty stupid because if there's not any doors in the other areas we're going into, we're literally going to be going right into where the wolves are. I have another idea. I quickly take all of the food that I can find that we've stupidly left around and throw it as far across the other balconies as I can. I actually did quite a good job at this, and I'm sure this must have distracted them. Relatively convinced that we're a bit more safe now, I go to barricade the door further when I realise that there's one of the wolves sitting there patiently waiting for us to come out. One of the problems with this is that they'll be extremely patient and they're a lot more intelligent than what people give them credit for. Now, even if we try and come back in the morning to exit through the same door, they're probably going to be waiting there nearby to come and get the food or us. Now, at this point we don't know how hungry they are, and we know we're in grave danger now. Now, the decision we make is one that I hate. We can't risk escaping, we literally have to just hold put in here for as long as our supplies last. Now, we decide that we have to go to sleep, but one of us stays on guard. My friend Edgar volunteered to do it, waiting near the door with a knife, and I must have fell asleep for about an hour or so. When I wake up, he's still there, and luckily there's no signs of the dogs. Now, we get to the morning and we have no idea whether they're still around or not. We decide that we should probably make it onto the roof because we think maybe they're going to be too scared to actually follow us up there, and if we really need, we'll get good signal to call for help. Now, I'm not so sure if this is a good idea or not because it effectively traps us up there, but if worse comes to worse, we can just about make the jump to the other building, which I know now is very stupid, but we weren't necessarily thinking rationally during this situation. So, we decide that we have to go for this, just to try and get a vantage point. So, we pack up all of our things and leave the candles there because they've already burnt themselves out. I grab a knife and so do my buddies, and we're all ready to fight for the death. Edgar bravely opens the door slowly, and thankfully there's no signs of any wolves around. We then take our absolute first steps onto the staircase, and we can hear a horrifying growl and bark coming from just below us. We all sprint immediately up the stairs. We're convinced that we're not going to make it. We kept on running and running until eventually we make it to the very top, and my friend Edgar quickly throws something onto the covering. We still have no idea what level them wolves are on, but they were definitely still there. So basically, we've now trapped ourselves onto the roofs with not many options. My other friend looks over the edge of the building and says he can just about make out some of the wolves. They seem to be circling around inside the building that we're in. He can just about make out some of their grey fur from where he is. Now, I think we should call for help again, but my friend says maybe we should make it on top of the roof, the next one over, and then we should be able to get back to relative safety because we can climb down the fence where the wolves won't be able to follow us. Now, I'll admit it, this is a pretty good idea to be honest, but there is danger of death because if we fall, we're probably going to break our legs and we're going to be dinner for some stupid animals that won't leave us alone. But we are running low on supplies now, so what choice do we have? Now, I'm somebody who used to do some good running when I was younger, actually competing for my school, being very quick. But that was at least 12 years ago now, and I'm not really sure of my athletic abilities. But I decide that I should probably be brave because really it's my fault for not alerting the others sooner to the strange things that happened, and that I should really be the one to fix this. At least that's what I rationalised with. So, I quickly throw across my sleeping bag and other gear to the other side. Well, I guess there's no going back now. I decide to get quite a nice run up and trace the steps. I'm ready now. I take one foot in front of me and leap across. Thankfully I make the jump. Now, the area that I land in is actually relatively solid and I'm actually really glad about this. I ended up forgetting about the wolves now, and I'm followed by Edgar, who quickly traces my steps. It's then my other friend, who is a lot more hesitant because he's a bit heavier than us, and he's not sure whether the roof is going to hold up. We shout to him to just come on and get on with it, but he won't move. I'm actually quite annoyed now, because we have to move in case the wolves follow us up onto this roof and we can't barricade it like the other one. As a precaution, I ended up throwing some more food down below us near ground level. It actually bounces out of sight, so annoyingly I can't see whether it's effective or not at actually attracting the wolves away from us. We keep on screaming for our other friend to come, and eventually he goes for it, and he just about makes it and we have to help him up. We're all very relieved to quickly gather up our things. Edgar looks down and he can see clearly that there's still wolves around, still in the building that we just come from. They actually tried to follow us up, and he can see through one of the windows that they're still trying to figure out a way to get onto the roof. We know they probably had menacing intent because they didn't bother getting their food that we threw down for them. Maybe they had young with them and they thought they were defending it, I don't know. We just know now that we have to move. Now when we set off again, I can taste blood, and I realise it's from running so hard to actually make the jump, and I'm actually struggling to get my breath. We make sure that we have everything, and we have to roof hop one more time, but luckily we make it across successfully now. The area that we move on to is actually relatively slippery, and we're walking across in this disgusting tar sludge which is actually really sticky on our shoes. We continue moving and have to actually climb across another large balcony on the roof used for some kind of surveying. We make it up to the next stage, which is a really large chimney pipe from one of the factories. We have to kind of slowly shimmy around it. It's hard to describe, but we're like sidestepping, and I'm someone that doesn't mind heights, but I hate it when I'm up high. Now my hands are sweating through my gloves, and I'm really struggling to hold on. The best I can do now is just not look down. We're at a point now where we have to take off our bags and slowly go down the ladder. Now I'm too scared to do this, and strangely my other friend, who's been a bit worried the whole time, volunteers to do it first. I think now he was probably doing it just because he knows it's a map to safety, but I'm glad he's offered. He starts climbing down the 40 or so steps and makes it to the bottom. We throw our bags down next to him, and luckily the roof doesn't give way. We all make it down safely, and now we're not far off where we need to be. There's one last fence we have to scale down, but to our horror we realise that they have some anti-theft and whatever you call it climbing paint all over this area, and there's spikes and things. This now means that we're not really with many options other than calling for help. We have a break again because we're sure we're away from the wolves, and I ended up spotting a break in the fence. There's an area that leads to trees and next to a main road that I'm sure we can make it to. We don't really have many other options, so we have to go for it. Now there's no easy way down from where we are, but I realise that we can quite easily jump down without getting too hurt as long as we roll. I volunteer to go first. I look around to make sure there's no wolves or any other danger, and I go for it. I ended up sliding funnily because the ground was pretty wet from some snowfall, but I make it okay. I immediately jump to my feet and grab the knife just in case anything comes for us. I'm quickly followed by Edgar and my other friend. We took one moment to look at each other, me and Edgar, and we then sprint towards the fence. I slide down first, then grab my bag through, followed by Edgar and my scared friend, and we've made it. The wolves are no longer going to be able to follow us here. It's too dangerous for them, and they're not going to get through the gap because obviously they can't lift it up. We're very elated that we've managed to make it out of there in one piece. While we're on the way home, I stop and say, "Hey, Edgar, have you seen my tent? I brought this with me in case of emergencies. It's a very small foldable one," and he says, "No." "Oh no, I'm sure you've left it on the roof." I curse myself because I know my dad's gonna kill me because he bought that for me very recently and it wasn't cheap. Now on the drive back, I can't stop thinking about what happened. None of us are talking, just in deep processing of the whole event. But one thing that really stands out to me is I have no idea who spoke to me on that roof or who the person was I saw opposite that time. I didn't really mention it to the others in full details. I knew they probably wouldn't believe me, but what was that? I'm not somebody who really believes in guardian angels or any of them types of things, but I don't know what else it could have been. I do know that situation could have ended horribly, and I'm glad to say that put an end to my urban exploring days. Now my dad did end up being relatively annoyed at me for losing the tent, but he just asked how my trip was, thinking I went on a regular camping one, and he was just glad to see me. I was out camping with a cousin of mine, and I was asleep in my tent. In the middle of the night, I felt something touching and slithering on me. I ignored it at first, believing that I was still home and my brother was annoying me, but then I finally realized and woke up to see a giant caterpillar. It's still one of the scariest things of my life. When I was a teen, me and two friends went camping and woke up in the middle of the night to a knife scraping along the sides of the tent at around waist height. It went on for probably about a minute but felt like a lifetime and then stopped, and we waited for maybe an hour and left without packing. Later that week we found out one of our friends that we hadn't invited had followed us, but we don't know if it was her. I was 10 or 15 miles into the backcountry wilderness with a friend on a multi-day backpacking trip. We were trout fishing for our supper on a small stream fairly close to the timberline. Seemingly out of nowhere, a game warden on a horseback materialized a few feet from where I stood. He dismounted, marched right up to me and demands to have a look at the contents of my krill. It wasn't a problem, but was very unnerving. The way that he apparently stalked us and snuck up on us. My friend and I weren't novices at being in the backcountry, so we're both a bit humbled at how this man had tried to ambush us, especially given the sharpness and the sparseness of the vegetation available to cover his approach. My heart was racing for quite a while after the encounter, and I vowed that I would get better at maintaining situational awareness. He was a good man though. Turns out I did have a fish that was a bit outside the size limit due to my misunderstanding of the regulation of this particular stream. The game warden had advised me that I need to get the fish on the fire and eat it tonight. He would have been within the rights to cite me and confiscate my fishing rod and tackle, which would have really stunk. When I was in high school, my friends and I went out to a remote spot in the mountains to camp. Just to get there, you needed a pretty serious off-roader. It was about 30 miles up a super rough road. There were river crossings, huge boulders in the road, and tons of sand. Now, the road trip took us all day, and we don't see another person. No one passed us, and we didn't see anybody camping, nothing. At one point, one of my friends noted it looked like nobody had ever driven off on the road before, which was weird because this is in Colorado and the roads/trails are very popular. Something worth pointing out, this road led into a box canyon, which is basically nature's cul-de-sac. The road we're on was the only road in and the only one out. All around us are massive cliffs, and another thing, we're deep in the mountains, far from any cell service. On top of that, we're in a box canyon, when even if you're next to a city you don't have service. All that said, we eventually find a spot and get set up. Every time we went camping, we play capture the flag. This isn't an exception, except we wait for it to get dark to start. Now, in the middle of the second round, me and one of my friends on my team hop up onto the road. It seemed like a good way to get around to the other flag. We walked down the road and began to see a glow coming towards us. Our first thought was that it's probably another 4x4 coming up, but we then realised it was a young woman holding up her phone looking for service. She was still at a distance, but she was panicky. She was rushing and stumbling at the same time, except she isn't drunk, it doesn't seem. We call out hello, but don't get a response. But it wasn't just that she ignored us. She looked like she didn't know we were there. You okay? Nothing. As she's passing us, we realize she's crying. You okay? She stumbles right past us, never showing a sign that she knows we're there. The whole time, just looking at her phone for service. Me and my friend are frozen. We watch her, still crying, shaking. She rounded a turn and disappeared. I yell out to everyone else to meet back at the camp. We do. I tell them what we saw, and I'm not proud to admit this, but we get scared. We said we'd stay in the camp that night, and in the morning we'd go looking. The first thing we do in the morning is decide that there must be some other people there that must know her, so we go down the end of the road and there's no signs of anyone. Then we decided to go to the entrance of the road and look for the woman, and nothing. Now, we're not sure how we got into this position or how she did, but she doesn't look like a hiker. She has regular clothes on, as if she'd just gotten in from the canyon at the other side. We were pretty sure that we're the only ones that have driven down that road in a while, so nobody's dropped her off, and the whole time we saw her, she was holding up the phone looking for service. I don't know what happened to her, but it really scared me. Years ago, my girlfriend and I were teachers, and in June of each year, we would take a group of children camping. We had a 12-person tent set up on our site, which was right next to a small lake. The site included a picnic table and fire ring. Part of the trip was telling campfire stories about Jersey Devil, since the campground was located in an area where there had been many sightings over the years. The kids enjoyed being scared, and they couldn't wait to return the following year. This was around the 5th annual trip that we had taken up to that point, and nothing really happened. On the last night after the stories, when the kids were safely asleep, my girlfriend and I sat by the campfire in the beach chairs. We had just brought a new puppy, and she was tied to a tent on a long lead so she could run around a bit. Now suddenly, the logs in the campfire collapsed and the light dimmed considerably. Our propane torch that was on the picnic table dimmed at the same time. It became virtually pitch black, and that's when the dog starts to growl. She was right next to me, and every hair on the back of my neck was stood up as she stared into the darkness. Suddenly, from out of the water comes a large figure about 20 yards away. At first I thought it was a person, but then it bent over and starts running on all fours. I could only see the outline of the thing, and the back end was higher than the front. It certainly wasn't a bear or dog or deer. It looked like something I've never seen before, and I was in no hurry to encounter it again. Now it trots away into the woods not far from our campsite. I jumped up and ran to my car and turned on the lights. The car lit up our campsite, but there was no sign of anything out of the ordinary. I tell my girlfriend to wake up the kids because we're leaving. She was the braver one and convinces me to stay, and we eventually calmed down and turned in for the night. I lay down by the tent, opening a large butter knife, and did not sleep until the sun came up. Nothing like this ever happened to me before or since, and I haven't been back camping there since the incident. My family moved from upstate New York to a small town near Brenderton, Florida. I moved with them. Their house is in a wildernessy neighborhood that hadn't existed there for too long. Native Americans used to occupy the land, from what we've heard. My room had a huge sliding glass door with no screens and was the only one in the house directly facing the view to the woods. Right when we moved in, I felt uneasy about being near the window, looking into the woods or having my blinds open. A few weeks after moving in, I started having what I think are night terrors. I would wake up screaming and think something was in my room trying to get me. I've never had this happen since, even as a child. It's freaky and unnerving for both me and my sleeping partner. I started hearing knocking on my window at night. Now at first I thought I was hearing things, but then I started getting really freaked out. I always ignored it and never went up to the window, looked inside or opened it. My partner never heard this. He was always asleep and brushed me off as just hearing things, but I was adamant and kept my window locked and always looked out there. I then started hearing my neighborhood/friend next door knocking on the window at night, whispering my name, asking if I'm up and if I want to come out and smoke with her. I always said no and go back to sleep, asking her about this, and she said that she was never doing that and that I'm just getting increasingly freaked out. I started feeling very alone and powerless, wondering if I was going crazy. Now on one night, I put a lucky protective crystal on my window for protection. Now, I didn't know exactly what it done for protection, but when I woke up, the crystal was in the same spot, broken in half, looking like lightning struck it. I saw dark figures in my room a couple of times, but nothing ever happened. I would only see them and they would be gone, and it was always during the night time that I would actually see them when I was barely awake. I figured there were spirits in the home, so I did a couple of things to help mitigate that, like using salt, burning cedarwood, and spraying holy water on the walls. Our back porch was screened in and had a nice place to sit outside. I meditated a couple of times out there and heard all the wildlife and creatures outside. Now sometimes the noises would stop and it would just be silent like dead air. I would listen for anything and never hear anything except the occasional branch snapping. I would go inside after that. Now we had bobcats, raccoons, alligator and wild boar, so I think it's probably an animal. Luckily I moved back to upstate New York for personal and career reasons, so obviously nothing else happened for me. I visited my family around Halloween time about a year after moving. My sister and I stayed up watching Pet Sematary and started talking about creepy stuff. She turns to me and says, "Dad, did you say that you saw some kind of Slender Man thing in the woods?" And immediately, of course, I get really freaked out. I asked my dad about what he saw, and apparently there's a very tall creature, about 9 feet I guess, which is extremely skinny, almost as black as a black tree, moving abnormally fast through the woods in broad daylight. He did have laser eye surgery not too long ago, which could have been it, but he's never seen anything like it before or since. Now this isn't my own experience, but my mum's, and the reason she didn't let any of my siblings and I go camping. She had gone camping with her friends sometime in the 80s. It was the first time she'd ever gone and didn't know exactly what to do with camping really. The way she describes it is that her friends had chosen the most isolated place in the woods they could find, and they were drinking and whatnot. After partying until 1 in the morning, they decided to go in for the night, and my mum woke up and heard some noises. She said she shook her friend up, and she also heard the noises, but wasn't as scared. Her friend just assured her it was an animal and to go back to sleep, and she did. The following morning, they woke up to see large boot prints circling around their tent and campfire. The footprints come from the woods and left in the same direction. They couldn't trace it further because of foliage. They packed up and left that day, even though they're supposed to be there for a week. Apparently, they weren't the only ones out there, and a few other people had similar incidents over the next 2 years in the same area, yet nobody ever got caught. Now my grandpa and dad like to go fishing and hunting a lot. Now one night they decided to spend the night on the river in the Appalachian Mountains. It was really late and they said they heard these awful screams coming from the opposite side of the woods over the river, saying it was inhuman but not a mountain lion. My dad is a pretty good guy and has been out in the woods before and doesn't get scared easily, but in this moment he was frozen with fear. Until finally it stopped. He felt like whatever it was knew they were there and wasn't happy about it, and it will still give him goosebumps even if he just thinks about it now. So this happened back in 2006 or 7. Me and my family went to a park. We've gone there for probably about 20 years. Now it's quite a big one too, but still, one day we come across part of it where meadows usually continue, yet all of a sudden a part of the forest was there. We were at first wondering what happened, then shrugged it off and went down, going towards it, then went inside of it. It was pretty dark in there. For being an afternoon in the autumn, it's kind of weird. There was almost no wind. It was silent. There was a part where the light came through a bit. Now I looked around and looked on the ground, which is black. There's black soil and it just looks so surreal. Between most of the tree roots were old crimson red bricks. They all looked pretty weathered, and the forest was, at least from the looks of it, 100 years old, if not more. Well, we come to the rather strange part. Where we're standing looking around, we're wondering why we've never seen this forest before, which isn't too big. Then it got strange, pretty dim, almost no wind, and stuffy. It was like something was in the air. All of us had goosebumps, and I heard a voice which told me, "Get out now. Leave." I told them, and we went out of there as quick as we could. The next when we come by this place was probably a month later. Now we head over to the same area, and the forest is gone, literally like it was never there in the first place. The grass looks as though that there's no meadows, and that it's completely normal, like it truly never existed. To this day, me and my family wonder what actually happened. Now I was camping in the woods one weekend. When I got up in the morning, someone had made a cup of tea and partially drank it and left it next to my fire. I was solo camping, by the way. So let me describe how the woods are shaped. I was in the same woods that I've described before, the friendly woods. I talked about it in the past in other posts, but I need to share a bit about it. It's about half a mile long, with about 150 yards thick between some houses and a not very busy road. Sometimes I feel like somebody's watching me there, but I've never had a weird experience until now. Anyway, I'll get into it. Over the last weekend, I wasn't in the forest as I had some work to do and was overall too busy to go out and spend some time alone in it. Last Monday, I walked into my little camp and I find it trashed. A makeshift camp I made was wrenched apart. A neon signpost saying camp with my name was cast over 15 feet from the ground it stood in. The entire wall of the cabin was torn down, and some guidelines holding the tarp on the top of it were cut. There was no storm, which is really bizarre. Strange, I thought maybe some teenagers decided to do it. Now the damage wasn't anything I couldn't fix. Today I was splitting some wood and carving into pieces for a game I play with some of my friends, and I took a break and texted a friend of mine for a bit. We talk about the forest and I tell him that the forest I was in was not scary, but I feel safe there. Just as I press send, about 50 feet behind me, hidden behind a hill, I hear a horrifying scream. Not a fox, I've heard those before, not a human, but more like a woman being murdered with a car screeching to a halt. But not either of those. I turned around and grabbed a knife off my belt. It was strange. Just as I tell my friend that I'm not afraid, I hear a scream. I went out to Mount Palomar near San Diego with my girlfriend, 2 friends and their dog, a husky. One of my friends had seasonal jobs in National Park Service. He's very into the outdoors. He knew of a staging area that the utility company of the area had up there in case they needed to store equipment of any kind. To be honest though, I think the lot ultimately belongs to the Forest Service though, because they had a key to unlock the gate to the area so we could park our cars in there and camp for the night, looking at the stars, enjoying each other's company. We leave to go up there on a Friday evening with the sun still up, and arrive there as it's getting dark. We use 3 cars to get there, so we park them in a triangle formation and set up the tents in the middle area. Once we got that set up, we have some food, a few drinks, and start checking out the stars. I had brought a high-powered laser pointer with me which allowed us to specifically point out constellations in the sky. My friend in the park service utilizes the laser pointer and gives us some awesome 45-minute talk on various constellations in the sky. We're having a great time. At this point, my other friend's dog begins to act up. She only gets hostile with strangers, but the 4 of us had been recently accepted for her for quite a long time already, so this wasn't normal. We stopped and looked over towards what she's barking at, and we see a figure about 30 feet away, in all dark clothes standing there. It was a man who seemed to be a bit over 6 feet tall, but he was wearing lots of clothing. I couldn't make out a face or anything else to identify about him. We were then taken by a complete surprise that there was another person around us, but we called out and said, "Hey, what are you doing up there?" He responded by saying that he's been given a lift by the sheriff up to the top of the mountain and some of the other rangers, and was spending the night up here since he didn't have a car to get all the way back up here. That sounds bizarre, as if a sheriff or ranger would actually do something like that. Now my park service friend slipped me a knife just in case, because we're all on edge at this point. I sit in front of my girlfriend and mentioned for her to get in the car, and we started to get our things together. My friend with the dog was doing the talking and bluffing us up to the point of saying we're in the military and the other's a firefighter, which was both not true. We're fairly built, but he was trying to give this stranger reasons not to try his luck on us. We were certain he was not some drifter who had miraculously made his way up, because it just doesn't make sense. He said to us if he could spend the night with our group, but we say no. He then said, "Can we have a blanket?" And we also declined. He said that he'll probably end up staying somewhere over there and points towards some brushes, maybe 50 feet or so off. We said okay, we'll be here, and have a nice night, and he walks off. This was a time for all of us to discuss what we wanted to, in clear unison. We wanted to get the hell out of there. We all thought this stranger was completely lying. We started packing up our tents and other camping gear. My park service buddy wanted to go over to unlock the gate again, which was about 300 feet away. So it's me, my girlfriend, my buddy with the dog, and the dog. While he was unlocking the gate, the dog starts to act up again. She was huffing behind us again. We turned around and my friend shone a flashlight, and sure enough, here he is, approaching from an angle that certainly was different from the one he walked off in. He basically tried to sneak up from a different direction. My buddy caught him and spoke for a while, and I left our ring of cars and stood facing him. I honestly can't remember what my friend said at this point, because I thought that me and the dog were going to have to fight this guy off and stop him from doing whatever his intentions are. I have adrenaline pumping like never before. I was already doing whatever it took to protect my friends, but he ends up walking off again. We had another stretch of time to finish getting the remaining things together. At this point, it was getting things done as fast as possible. We were racing against the clock and an unknown evil. We didn't know what to do, but this man wanted to do something to us. I quickly jog over to my friend who's in the process of going to the gate, opening it up, and we have another encounter. We've packed up everything and I told him, "Go away ASAP." So we briskly walked back to the cars, fired them up and got out of the lot, closed the gate behind us, and we went to drive down for about 30 seconds or so to a closed general store, put into the parking lot and dial 911. My friend was talking to the police. We learned that no sheriff had given anybody a ride up the mountain tonight, and there's no rangers too. Confirmed suspicious of the shady activity. The Olives said they'd send up whoever they had available to check it out, and that we should go. After that call, we did just that. We had to head down to the right to start working our way down the mountain on that road. We were past underneath where we were set up at the staging area to camp. As we drove by that area, we saw a black car parked out in a turnout just below where we'd been earlier, and a man peering out the hood of the parked car towards us. There is a small amount of room for speculation, but who the hell else would have been there? It could only have been him. We ended up seeing that one of my friends got calls from the other two friends as they were driving down the mountain, confirming what they saw is the same as we did. It took us around 20 to 30 minutes to get down the mountain and park at a gas station next to a casino down here. but we hung out there for around an hour until it was 2 a.m. to relax and let our nerves settle. It was the most comforting time I've ever had to be in a populated area. Now, if we didn't have the dog to warn us, I don't know what kind of situation could have played out. None of us ever gone back there since, and just writing this again really makes my skin crawl. When I was a kid, like 12 or 13, I was camping with ventures. They're kind of like Boy Scouts, but no parental supervision. We're in a huge national park. I mean, a group of 7 of us, all about the same age of 12 to 15. We had a 4-night/5-day hike camp planned out, and the parents all knew our route and were expecting us back. All of us, despite being young, had multiple years of camping experience and been on between 3 or 15 camps. The trip started out pretty awesome. We made camp the first 2 nights at our desired sites, and it's beautiful out. And we got up to the typical fun that kids get up to. 3rd night, all 3 of our planned sites have people in them, and we end up setting up, maybe a little too close to a group of other campers. We set up our kitchen, make dinner, got a fire going, and then people started hanging out at our camp. Now, to explain our ages, the oldest is 15. Now, the group that's decided to mingle with us is early 20s or so, and it starts out really friendly. We're talking about camping and other things. We refuse the friendly offers to drink, and then the pushy ones get annoyed. And being as young as we are, we're less than tactful about asking to be left alone. Voices are raised, and they ended up leaving our site. Then we turned in for the night. I remembered hearing their drunken revelry as I fell asleep. At some point in the middle of the night, I woke up to screaming and noticed my tent is being violently shook. I grabbed my flashlight, shoeless and disorientated, and took in the chaos. At least 10 fully grown adults were in our camp, breaking our tents, throwing stuff around and screaming. It ended up devolving into a fight, with me and 3 of the boys I went in with getting beaten badly. I don't remember how much of the assault went on before it ended, but apparently when things were dying down, they were saying super creepy stuff and threatening the girls. We packed up and left before the sun rose and walked the first couple of hours by flashlights. They'd stolen most of our food, our Coleman stove, and a lot of our things, and some of the girls' clothes too, which is really weird. So at this point, we're in the middle of our hike and still had another day or so ahead of us, and we had further sleepless nights in the woods before making it back. Now, this wasn't exactly creepy, but scared the life out of me. We were moving across the country from Massachusetts to the Midwest and ended up in one of the many dense forests in the Pennsylvania area to camp for the night. Anyways, we drove into the campground, which was a spiraling dirt road in the dark. We were camping in our 90s era pop-up camper, and we're caring for our dog and cat who are there with us. Now, we arrived to the actual campsite around 11 p.m. At first it started a light drizzle while we're setting up the camp. We luckily got the camper set up before it really dumps on us. It was the beginning of summer's wet season, where storms are often brutal, and brutal it was. Before we knew it, seemingly all the water in the world was upon us. Neither our pets or family of 5 actually were excited about the rain. Actually quite the opposite. And now there's thunder and lightning everywhere. Regardless, we're having fun with card games and such while the skies open up above. The storm seemed significantly worse driving up there, and my anxiety increases. The thunder got louder and louder and lightning much closer. My father had an irrational fear of lightning and can't help worry. We began counting the miles using the thunder until the lightning was almost identically timed together. At this point, we're in the middle of the camper staying away from metal parts, which was currently being rocked by wind. The lightning becomes so frequent that we began to have legitimate fears of being struck. All of a sudden, We smelled the strong odour of copper, and then the loudest thunder I've ever heard in my life, directly next to our flimsy shelter, splintering everything around it. After that, eventually the storm subsided, and we felt comfortable enough to go to sleep. In the morning, we left our camper to see severed tree limbs and discarded leaves, along with a tree not 10 feet from our camper that had been shattered. It's crazy how strong lightning is. I'm just glad we actually had the camper to take shelter in. I'm a long-haul truck driver, and I've seen plenty of supernatural stuff out on the interstate. Now, within the first few months of driving, IIRC was PA. My first couple years I was a night driver, so it was hard to see things sometimes. But the one in PA was me trying to follow a flatbedder who was hauling serious loads through the mountain. At one point, I started falling back because I can feel the van starting to lean. It wasn't long after I reached down to take a swig off my handy monster I had, and I look up, and there's a guy standing off the shoulder just outside the tree line wearing what appears to be some type of military uniform. It looked as though he's Revolutionary War era. He had a musket as well. As I approach, I can see him staring right at me. And then he starts walking back into the tree line, still looking at me. Before he manages to make it through the trees, he disappears, like literally vanishes into thin air. I had my windows down, and the air in the area gets real cold. After about a mile, it warmed up again, and I had a really sad feeling coming over me thereafter. Needless to say, I didn't stop for the rest of my trip. While driving in New Mexico, I've seen some things in the sky that I can't explain. Lights rapidly changing direction, taking off at blinding speeds, with no sound barriers being broken. I've seen lights hovering over the desert several miles off the interstate. Then it suddenly takes off, and the light cuts out. Various shapes and sizes from what I can make out. I know military aircraft pretty well, and some of them better than others. And I know that there's no military aircraft that can do that. Conventional aircraft can't possibly either. The most vivid one would be at an off-ramp in New Mexico. I stopped to use the bathroom and decided to turn into a 15-minute break. As I'm stargazing, admiring how clear the stars are, I saw what looked like a formation of lights in the shape of a triangle lifting up off the desert floor, then taking off into the sky. It kept on gaining altitude until it disappeared. I looked down at my watch and noticed it's not ticking, so I pull out my phone and it's off. I turn my phone on, and according to my phone, it's been 5 minutes since my watch stopped. It felt like something out of a film. Kent, Texas is another one. There's an old Chevron station, I think. Seems like FedEx drivers like stopping there in droves. I'm guessing it's a popular drop and hookup point for them or something. But one day I needed the bathroom, so I had to stop. I don't know why I didn't stop in the van horn, so I pull off and roll up to an empty parking lot across the street. Kent is an abandoned town. I walk up to the bush line and notice a makeshift fire pit. The wood is somewhat burnt, but not all the way. The weird thing is that there's an unscratched dollar bill stuck in the wood. For a second I was like, ooh, I think that's candy. But then this feeling suddenly come over me, so I left it alone, peed in the bush, and as I'm walking back, I look over and get a real negative feeling. I look to the ground in front of me and bam, there's a rattlesnake literally 2 feet from me. I stop dead in my tracks. It starts hissing at me and goes to lunge, but luckily hits a twig. I run as fast as I can back to my truck, feeling like someone's behind me. I kick up a lot of dust getting out of there and have never stopped in Kent since. In Missouri, I stopped off at a ramp to stretch out and take a breather. As I'm smoking a cigarette, a little girl from some direction I couldn't figure out where giggles and says, "Hi." "Hi, mister." My initial reaction was, what's a kid doing out here at this time? So I walk back and say hi. She responds with, "My mum says you'll be okay, don't worry." Now utterly confused, I ask her what she means, and she doesn't reply. Then suddenly, I feel like someone's standing next to me, but it doesn't feel negative or bad, just as though someone's right there with me. Since it didn't have a negative vibe to it, I just finished my cigarette and left. Later on down the road, I realised that I forgot to fuel up at my last stop when the warning light came on, so I scrambled to look at my GPS and find the nearest stop. I find one and set the course. As I roll into the truck stop, my truck starts stuttering, and I barely make it to the fuel line before the truck dies. It wasn't until fueling up that I realised what had happened to me at the last truck stop, and it was terrifying. I've seen drivers duke it out on some fuel lines many times. I've seen brawls happen in the back of truck stops, many rookies hitting each other's trucks by accident, you name it. The most memorable moment, however, was a fight when I was on a trip with a co-driver whose name I won't say. In Arizona, I stop at a truck stop between Flag State and the CA state line. After an eternity, I finally get fueled up on the fuel line. I fuel up and go inside, getting a drink and food. I come back and the sleeper curtain is open. No co-driver. Lonely half hour goes by and he comes out. That's cool. He can take his time because I'm not going to stop from here out. I put some trash in a couple of bags, putting it on the floor. It was mostly his trash from his shift prior. I can't stand having any in the cab. He opens the door and dumps bags on the ground, so I lit him up with all the fury I can muster. There's 2 garbage cans 10 feet away. I go put the bags in the trash cans and come back to the truck. As I'm doing my logbook, I look up and glance in the mirror. I can see 2 drivers flapping wings at each other. Oh, a fight. Let's watch. Suddenly, they go like baboons. Fists flying, but they're not landing. Then one of the drivers picks up the trash can and throws it at the other driver. The can hits him square in the face and blows open with paper towels going everywhere. Just like WWE apparently. So I get out and start walking back to watch. And apparently, every other driver on the fuel line had the same idea. The driver who got trash canned reaches into the storage compartment near him, pulling out a huge chain with a padlock on it, swinging furiously, and he's coming back and forth to the truck where the trash canner is. The other guy takes out the pump, going to his driver's side window, knocks a mirror off his truck, puts a huge dent in his fender. He then makes it back to the trash canner. The guy runs around the other side of the fuel pump. He then starts beating him with a bottle All this does is gets him wet and pisses him off even more now. Enough time rolls by, but they realise neither weapon of choice is doing any good. And in one of the weirdest things I've ever seen, they both stop, bear hug each other, then walk off. I walk inside to tell the lady there's a fire in the fuel line and she breaks out some kind of stick to break it up. But they're all good now. This happened many years ago, in the summer of '87. At the time I was 19, and my best friend was 18. We were visiting her boyfriend at his house, which was situated basically in a wooded area next to a large field, in a very rural tobacco growing area in the south. It was dark out, but you could see fairly well because the sky was clear and full of stars. She and I are resting on the front porch with our feet resting on the steps. We're just talking and laughing when all of a sudden we saw a round, brightly lit object just a few feet above the tree, maybe 30 or so in front of us and about 50 above us, hovering just at the treetops. It had red and white lights all around it, but still wasn't bright enough. Then it gave more of a bright glow. The lights were flashing a lot and we just sat there silently. We don't make any noise at all. Now this thing was like it was sitting there watching us. We didn't feel afraid, mainly because we're fascinated and curious as to what it could possibly be. We sat there whispering back and forth, trying to figure out what it was for a good 3 to 4 minutes, with her boyfriend opening the door finally to come out, and we turned and told him to hurry and come and look at this. He reached out and flipped on the porch light before he could even get out from under the porch light to see it. It then went straight up, about 20 feet-ish, and then zipped out of sight, diagonally. Then it disappeared completely in maybe a matter of 3 seconds. Her boyfriend and his brother had previously told us that they'd worked in the middle of the night a few years ago and had seen some bright lights coming from their bedroom window. They thought it was police cars, but when they looked out the window, they saw a round, brightly lit object hovering in a field above the trees, maybe 10 feet above the ground. Nobody believed them because they were kids. We even laughed it off until our encounter. Needless to say, neither of us had seen anything like it before, and I've never seen anything like it since. Now my husband believes me, and we've spent many nights looking into the sky to see anything like it again, but we haven't. This is something that happened to me when I was about 15 years old and was staying at my friend's house. I still get spooked just thinking about it, and I thought I might share it. I think it was on a Saturday that we were watching old movies, playing video games, or whatever he suggested that we'd do, like going for a walk in the forest and whatnot. I was bored and thought, why not? He said there were some old abandoned houses in the woods that I had never been to before or heard about before. I thought that was pretty cool, and he told me that he could show me around. So we headed out, and I brought a flashlight with me because it's getting dark. We began to walk through a trail surrounded by some unusually tall trees. This trail was getting deeper and deeper into the woods, and was soon not much more than tall grass, stones and trees. We had walked around for 30 or 40 minutes when it started getting really dark. I then asked if he was sure that we're going in the right direction when I suddenly noticed a small Dutch colonial style house peeking out of the trees. It was white and I think it had some kind of porch on it. It appeared deteriorated and truly abandoned from the outside. I turned around and noticed that my friend wasn't there anymore. I thought he was playing around with me, so I just kept casually walking towards the house and pretended that I didn't care. I looked through one of the windows and didn't see anything, but I heard a distinctive giggle above me. The weird thing is that it definitely sounded like a middle-aged woman, not my friend. I was a bit frightened and call out my friend's name, but he doesn't answer. I was so scared and angry that I yelled it really loud. The next thing that happened is something I can only describe as hell breaking loose. I heard a woman crying and wailing loudly and letting out these horrifying guttural screams. I didn't even know where it come from, but I was too terrified to do anything. Besides running, I go straight through the woods. Occasionally I tripped over rocks and stuff and ended up getting a big scar on the back of my lower leg. I reached the road and I think I'm about 15 minutes or so away from seeing a car, and luckily I find one. The guy was nice enough to drive me home and said, "Do I need help because I'm bleeding?" Here's a kicker though. I checked my phone and my friend had sent me 2 messages saying why did I leave and where was I. I was happy that he was alive and I asked him if he's still in the woods. He didn't know what I was talking about and said he's been home the whole day. I thought he was joking, but I saw the first 2 messages were sent around the time when he should have been in the woods already. It's been many years since, and we're not hanging out anymore, but he maintained for a long time that he didn't go into the woods with me and that he was home the whole day when I suddenly just left without warning while he was in the bathroom. He said that he didn't know about any home in the woods either. So I'm not exactly a paranormal believer per se, though I have had a couple of experiences while hunting or hiking that I can't necessarily explain rationally. The most unnerving one probably happened 7 to 8 years back. Now normally, I would hunt on some property that my family owns. Don't even remember the reason anymore that I decided to hunt on public land this time. Probably just a change of scenery. I remembered that it was evening in fall, but fairly uncharacteristically warm that day. I got to the access road and pulled off to the spot that everybody pulls off to park and walk in, and noticed that there's a couple of old boys already there. Nothing too weird about them, except there's no truck or vehicle for them to have pulled in on. They didn't have guns with them, but they're dressed in hunter orange, but at this time, I figured that they're backpackers or campers. At the time, we're not too far away from this spot in a campground, so it's not uncommon for folks to spend weeks away from their family for some peace or quiet to go to a hunting trip. Anyway, they seemed friendly enough and there was absolutely nothing said to make them seem any different than hundreds of other fellows I've met hunting. They're basically some hillbillies from the sounds of it, and we talked for a couple of minutes and they shot off. And I sat on my phone for a bit trying to give them a head start because I was afraid they'd drive off some of the squirrels. Except I clearly didn't wait long enough. Probably like 10 minutes up the trail, it curved to the left and I heard noises coming from directly ahead. It sounded bigger than a squirrel, but also it didn't seem like any animal that should be there. When I crept off the path ground and started to drop so I'd be able to look down and see my new pals, I realised that nothing's acting right. This is going to be hard to explain without a visual, but they were just moving, but not like normal people. Their movements were jerky, almost like they'd forgotten how to walk and things like their knees and joints weren't able to bend. I didn't stick around too long because it was terrifying. I backed away slowly and quietly to the trail and then get into my car, then driving off. Now, I've spoken with several open-minded outdoorsmen in the area and they think maybe they're on drugs, but I don't know. It just seems a lot different to the movement of people on drugs and looks very unnatural and scary. Okay, so I live in the woods around the Carolines. I am just playing soccer outside and it's just me and my dog, and I suddenly hear some noise. I realise then that it's music. I have no idea where it come from, but it sounded like wind chimes. It sounds like there's multiple, but it got creepier. I was tempted to follow it, but I did not know what it was. I was freaked out and went back to my house. Come out a few hours later and I can still hear it coming from the woods. It suddenly stops again just as soon as it started, and now I'm totally freaked out. I'm from a different country, and I'm similar to what you guys call a park ranger, but with some subtle differences. Now basically, similar to a park ranger, I would have an area that I would have to cover and take shifts during my job. Often we didn't have too many crazy things happen. The biggest issue that we would find was when people would be lost out in the snow, they could literally freeze to death if they couldn't get help. It can be very difficult to get a fire going whenever there's snowfall, so this is something we're often very careful of. Now, there was one particular day that I was on my patrol like normal. Everything was normal and I didn't find anything, so I headed into the station for the day. As I headed in, I got word of apparently a potential missing persons, but also to be advised that this person's a little bit off and potentially armed. We were basically getting called in from the HQ to say be very careful because this situation feels a bit weird and this person may potentially be hostile. Apparently some people had been really scared of this person who encountered them. They said they wouldn't talk sense when they're encountered, and they would have something in their hand at all times, often concealed in their jacket. So yeah, that was what I had to investigate. I didn't feel very confident in doing so, and to be honest I was pretty annoyed because the day was going very well up until this point. So, with not much of a choice, I set out looking for this person, thinking maybe they're completely deranged and we can try and get them somewhere to get help. So I begin. Now as I set out, the snow clouds have formed again, but there's not really much snow now. I make my way across the main path and I can see that there's no other footprints around here, so obviously there's nobody else about, which is quite a good thing for me. I start to head downhill and the trees around me are absolutely massive. The good thing is it blocks any wind perfectly, so I'm not actually too cold. Plus where I am, if I start sliding and falling it'll be quite funny because I'll go quite far before I stop, but I'll cover lots of ground that way. I mean man, I'm almost half tempted to do it because it'll make my search much quicker. Now, while I'm walking, I notice there's some strange markings on some of the trees. They look similar to our own ones which mark the path that people go onto, but they're subtly different. It's almost like somebody's tried to copy our version, or it's like a fake version which somebody's just spray painted onto the trees without a stencil. It's pretty weird. I call into the base and ask if we put any new ones down, and they confirm that there shouldn't be anything here. That's a little odd. I think maybe, just maybe, someone was here and was using it as a marker to find the way back to civilization if needed, but I can't really be too sure. So I make a mental note of it and continue walking, and then I find another marker which is really strange. I get just past the second one, and I realise one of the trees has fallen recently. I get right up to the bottom of it, and there's some axe marks there. This is weird because this area is pretty well protected and I know you definitely can't do that. I start to think maybe these people were doing some illegal logging and they don't want to be caught. Yeah, it makes more sense to me now. I know I have to be cautious because some of these guys are a little bit crazy where I live, and I don't know, living out in the isolation and snow can really take its toll on you if you're not prepared for it. But looking around I can see the snowfall's still fresh, so there's nothing really to worry about. For some reason in this moment I felt relatively lonely. I don't know why, I just felt it suddenly. It was kind of hard to describe. It felt basically like I was miles and miles away from people, which is really bizarre because usually I never feel this out here. Yes, I'm only a radio away from help, but that doesn't make you feel close to people here. I'm suddenly interrupted as another one of these markings comes parallel to our own ones, the sort of fake version that I saw before. That's really odd. Maybe they were marking trees that they wanted to cut down, but if this was the case, they were absolutely crazy to mark it next to where they know that we're going. Again, something that doesn't make sense. I can see another one just off another tree parallel to the original one I saw it on, and I think this is really weird. I know that I have to keep moving now and try and cover some new ground, but I'm not feeling very confident. I eventually break away into a new area, which is away from where those markers are, and actually start to feel a lot better. I'm being very careful of where I'm going because it's very easy to get lost in situations like these. Another thing you have to be careful of is if you slip and fall, you can really easily get hurt, and people don't consider that if you don't move much trying to tend to a wound, you can get cold very quickly, so I'm very cautious of this. I keep checking in on my radio periodically just so the team back at the base know that I'm okay. I ask if anyone else has seen anything and I get negative. This is strange. Now, just as I round the corner, I can suddenly see somebody standing dead still in the centre of the path. They're not moving at all, and strangely don't seem to have noticed me. I can also see them holding something in their hands. Thinking it's one of the other guys out here working with me, I quickly put a radio call across, and then they say nobody's here but you, just be cautious, okay? I say Roger, and call out to the person. I say, hey, I'm here to help you, are you okay? And there's nothing. I say it again, I'm here to help you, and I don't hear a thing. The weirdest thing is that this person doesn't move whatsoever. They literally just stand there completely still, holding whatever it is up ahead of me. Now, I'm getting a little bit worried now, but I have to go forward to investigate. I mean, it's literally a part of my job. For some reason, when I start to advance, the trees feel somehow more menacing than before. I know this person hasn't come off the path because from where I'm standing I can't see any footprints in the snow, so that leads me to my next question for myself. Where did this person come from? I call out hey one more time, somewhat quieter. Not because I'm scared, just because I've advanced a bit further, but this person just stays there, completely still. I then decide just to stay still for a moment, and almost in sync with me, this person just walks off, absolutely ignoring me and the situation almost, which is really bizarre. They go slightly towards a bend and I realise I'm not going to be able to see them soon. It kind of goes up a hill on the left side so you can't really see. There is a large clearing to the right, which is where a frozen lake is, but I'm not going to go there and I know this person isn't. Now with the person out of sight, I felt a little bit more safe and continue onwards. I stop every few seconds and just rest on a tree and try and look for any movement because I don't know if this person is alone or not. When I do so, I don't see much of anything. Now I decide to move to the lake. I can see some tracks here too, like somebody's been skiing or on sleds or something. And I realise that I've got a pretty good vantage point here. I realise that if I continue walking, I should be able to see everything. I'm unsure what to do because I don't know how well frozen that the lake is, so I decide it's best to leave it. As I turn on my hill, the pressure confirms that with a loud crack sound. It's actually quite annoying for me at the time because it makes it easy for the person to know where I am. So anyway, I eventually make it up to where this person should have been, and I can't find much of anything. There are more tracks that lead off into the woods, and I decide that I'm going to have to follow it. Just as I go to turn in the direction where I think the person's gone, I see something on the floor which looks really odd. I can't be certain, but I see something that looks just like blood, and a couple of drips of it. So that only means one of two things, either this person's bleeding or an animal is, and neither are good because A, it would mean there's some kind of illegal hunting, or B, the person's in some kind of trouble and might need some help, or C, I don't know what it is, and that's what my mind went to. Annoyingly, it's my job now to follow the tracks and go into the direction where the blood is, but not before I radio in what's happening. My team says that they're gonna triangulate my position somewhat, and they're gonna send some other guys over, which actually makes me more confident. Again, my team tells me that I must proceed with caution because help isn't that close, and I'm out on my own here. I say roger and continue. Upon my walk, I realise more of these strange markings around. I decide that I should try and count however many there are just so I can report it to the guys later, but I now avoid this and the well-trodden path. I now go into the wild as I follow in the footprints of this person who I can't seem to make contact with. Now, I begin following the tracks for a little while. I must have done so for a good 10 minutes and I don't seem to be getting any closer, which is really odd. Until suddenly, I can just about make out another silhouette further up the path from me. This one doesn't seem to be moving too much. Again, I think this is really strange because there shouldn't really be anyone else out here, and it looks different from the person that I've seen before. It's strange because they seem to vanish off into the trees too. I now see something again which makes my heart skip a beat. There's more blood. There's blood where this person was too, and I can see it from some kind of snowshoe. You know when you can see the footprint of something? Although this one had spikes from obviously being adapted to cold weather. There was a bloody footprint which was leading off further away from me, different from what I'd seen before. The footprints didn't match, and that's really odd. Unsure whether it is an injured person walking around or I just don't know what was happening, I radio it in again, but unfortunately it doesn't go through because the area that I've went to has hills which are basically blocking my radio from working. So now I've got a dilemma. I can go in one of two directions here. I can try and follow the first person or the second. I opt for following the second person. I let out one call trying to get their attention, but nobody replies again. I then decide to follow the footprints, and just before I set off, I can see a silhouette again up on the bridge. Now they've rested something on the side of the bridge, but I can't really see what this is. I pick up the pace a little bit and feel more brave now as I'd go to investigate what's happening. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm well trained for situations, but I'm really becoming further and further out of my depth here, especially because I don't actually know the territory too well. I eventually get up to the bridge and I can see something resting on it. I can then see lots of blood dripped onto the bottom of something. I then get closer and to my horror, I realise that it's an axe and there's blood dripping from the tip of it. And it looks very fresh. Weirdly, I also can't see any other footprints as I take a moment to look around. I don't know where this person has gone, and I sure as hell don't want to find out anytime soon, but I have to. And then realise that this crazy person must have gone into the flowing stream now. To give you an idea of how insane that is, if you fall in here for less than a minute, you're pretty much dead, and that's just what this person seems to have done. Now, I was so excited to at least have some kind of lead, but I knew it's going to be very dangerous to follow them around here. That only means one thing though, that they must have went downstream. Thank God I managed to get radio signal again, and I call in exactly what's happened, and they say they're going to get the police involved, and they say you can head back or keep following, it's up to you. I then somewhat stupidly say that I'm going to head back, but decide to investigate a little bit more. I've realised that maybe a crime's just been committed, or at the very least I've killed some kind of animal and I need to at least help. Maybe that was the other person earlier that I saw, I don't know. I head back, now going slightly off the course again, and follow the stream downhill. I follow this until eventually I can see some more footprints leading into the forest once more. I can then see a trail of blood, and I seem to be getting closer because the tracks seem more and more fresh. just as I think I'm onto a lead, I hear somebody scream out. Now this is an absolutely belching, blood-curdling scream, something like I've never really heard before. It almost doesn't sound human, it was that bad. I then round a corner and I can see what only looks like a crime scene from a horror movie. There's blood everywhere and multiple trees knocked over, and scratching marks on some of the trees. I've never seen anything like it. It literally looked like somebody had been mauled by a bear. Now, what really scared me is that I didn't hear that scream once again. I looked around and I can't see any more tracks, and I'm met with this deep fear in my belly, and my lips go dry as my saliva dries up. I look around and I really can't find any source or body as to what's happened out here. That's what really confuses me. I expected to find a wounded person here that I'd be able to medevac, but nothing. Realizing that I've seen enough and starting to feel very sick, I decide that I'm gonna have to trek back the way that I've come. But now I realize I'm just a little bit lost, and I don't know what to do. I decide the best thing to do is have a quick look around to see if there's anybody dying, but there's literally no one. I then realize that I'm probably in a weird situation now, and once again, I hear another sound. This one's completely different. I hear my own name. Thinking it's one of the other workers here, I say, "Oh, thank God you're here. Come help me quick." And then I can see a figure just off in the distance in all black, slowly raising their finger up to their lips to be quiet. A gesture that spoke thousands of words to me, and the most important one was to run. I then turn around, and before you knew it, I was heading back where I'd come from. This wasn't one of the guys I worked with, and this definitely wasn't somebody in trouble. This was something completely different. Somebody was trying to trap me then or there, or somehow wanted me to see whatever had just happened. Now I can never be sure where the source of the blood was, but that person didn't seem to have any on them. I can only imagine that they caused it. I jogged for probably 15 minutes before making it back to one of the main trail paths. I stupidly fell into a frozen over puddle and get very wet, and that annoys me because I think I'm going to start getting frostbite on my toes, and I don't want to lose any toes, but it feels like it's going to happen. I now, funnily enough, have to walk across some boards and bits of wood over some water, which is hideously dangerous, but I don't really have much of a choice now. I sprint, and then I see another body. This time, paralyzed with fear, I drop down to the ground and wait. This person's looking around, and I realize that something's different this time. I put my radio onto the lowest volume it goes, and I make contact and say, "Are you there?" And thankfully, they put the radio up to their ear. I say, "Hey, I'm right next to you, and is this?" and one of the other workers' names. But strangely, they don't reply. Thinking maybe I've gone through to the wrong person, I switch channels a couple of times and make it through. I then ask them for the location, and to my horror, they're in a complete different place to me. I then see the person up ahead of me put the radio down and continued walking with something in their hands. They were dressed in camouflage, basically a white sniper's suit kind of thing. This is not something we would wear. They were trying not to be seen. I don't know how long I was on the ground for, but it was cold enough that I couldn't feel my hands and feet. I slowly get up and start to kind of crawl like they do in the military through the woods for a bit longer. I managed to make it out to one more clearing, and then I sprint for a good another 10 minutes. My feet are burning now, and my eyes actually hurt from being out in the snow for so long. I sprint and eventually call in for help, and I ask for a proximity of the closest next worker to me, of which is given. Now seeing this person just coming up over the horizon is like something I'll never forget. I've never felt such relief in my life, almost like I'd become accustomed to the tension and forgot how it was to feel normal. I run over to them and I quickly blurt out everything that's happened, and I have to stop a few times and repeat myself because I'm not really talking cohesively. I then explain there's lots of people out there and I think something horrible's happened. This worker then informs me that the police are also dealing with this situation and there's quite a big search, and he quickly takes me over to his truck and gets me warm again. I sit there drinking coffee with him for a little bit as we listen on the radio, and we hear one of the law enforcement say that they've located a body. That was enough to send chills down my spine, and suddenly I didn't feel so warm from the coffee. A couple of hours later, I have to give a statement to the police of what happened, and can you believe this? They thought I might have been one of the suspects. It was only after I gave my full statement that they realised it wasn't my fault. I then say to them, "What did you find?" And they don't tell me too much, but they just say that they found a body that they're trying to identify, and they were murdered with definitely some kind of blunt weapon like an axe. I then explain exactly where it should be, and they say to leave the rest with them. We did eventually get an update from the law enforcement who says that other than finding the body, they went to that exact bridge and couldn't find any forensics, and also not the axe. That was to my absolute shock, because I saw it right there with my own eyes. They say they saw some footprints leading off of the trail and into the water, but not much else. They think somebody gone back there to clean up the scene. And shockingly, they never found the blood site that I found myself. My work were very supportive and understood why I needed a long time off, and thankfully supported me in changing jobs. It's something I don't really like thinking about much to this day, but from the conversations with my bosses and law enforcement, we think that there are a couple of killers out there who were targeting the hiker who they managed to get, then also myself, and they were using radios to communicate with each other to find me, and I must have just escaped. It's something that still haunts me to this day, and I know it's something I'll never forget. How could I? Red River Gorge is a beautiful and huge park full of wildlife, rock climbing, waterfalls and dense forests, gorges and beautiful views. The place feels truly isolated, disconnected from the rest of the world. One evening, my boyfriend D and I decided to go camping at the gorge. We went out and tried to find a campground that was as backwards as possible. Sites were spread far from each other. Our site, that was on the edge of a very steep drop-off. We arrived at sunset and quickly set up. By the time we fully set up, the sun had set, and we began making a fire. About 20 minutes into relaxing, we began to hear howling that doesn't go away, and it doesn't sound like it's far from us. We both freaked out by the realization that there were wolves nearby, but we tried to not overreact and continued to sit by our fire. 10 minutes later, I start hearing a faint yelling about 15 feet away past the cliff's edge. Now, I told Dee to be quiet and listen, and we're both frozen out of fear. A woman was now screaming. I couldn't make out any words at that point, but it was a deep, gurgling shriek, a noise that I've never heard a person make in my life before. Then I heard it. She was screaming, "Help, please someone help. Someone please help me," repeating this over and over again, howling at the top of her lungs. I'm terrified. She could have been turned around in the dark and fallen off the cliff. She could have been attacked by wolves or a bear or bitten by a snake. At this point we both sprinted into my car, frantically climbing inside, locking the doors. I tried calling the police but have no service. I threw the car in reverse and sped down the dirt road to find anyone that could help. The shrieks continued. I didn't make it far before I found 3 young men standing on the edge of the forest. I slowed down and cracked my window, still hearing that woman begging for help, and asking the men if they heard that. How could they have not heard it? I told them it was a young woman screaming in the forest. Then, 2 of them went sprinting into the darkness. Without questioning me or anything, the other one just stood by my car, assuring me he had no idea what was happening. While the 2 men were somewhere in the forest, I drove further down the dirt road until I found a spot to turn around at. When I came back, the screaming had stopped, and the men were back by the side of the road. I slowed down and asked them where the woman was, and one of the men that had run into the woods said, "Don't worry, it was actually just a kid messing around." I just said okay. I drove back as quickly as possible. We left the campsite and went straight home. Once out of the woods, we called the local police station multiple times to no answer. I know it wasn't a child. I've never heard such primal screams in my life. It made my skin crawl and my heart race just thinking about it. What did those men do that night? What was I a witness to? I live just where farmland meets the edge of the suburbia, on an island off the coast of BC. The climate here is sub-temperate rainforest, so the natural and untouched landscape is incredibly wild, dense and lush. I'm keen on endurance cycling, and I take full advantage of the trail network in the forest surrounding my area. I work long hours, so most of my winter rides are in complete darkness with my trusty trail light. One section of my home trail winds through a rainforest bog full of hundreds of trees. They're huge. It's absolutely beautiful in daytime. It feels like a magical place with shafts of sunlight piercing the fog, hundreds of different species of flora, and there's so many wild animals out there. It's really beautiful. Now at nights, my gut starts tightening as the thought of passing through this mile-long section of trail appears. One day about a year ago, I was lucky enough to get a chance to go for a ride through it, so I took it. It was cold and very rainy, with few other people out on the trail. I had packed thermos of hot coffee in my backpack, and I thought the rainforest-style bog was the best place to take a rest as any. Now, I chill out. I have an interest in botany, so I was looking closely at the lynches growing off of the huge Douglas fir. But suddenly, I felt distinctly not alone. No biggie. Lots of people use the trail, although not many are out there that day because the weather's so wet and cold. And that's when I heard it. A meow. That's odd because this isn't a good place for a cat to be alone. We have cougars and bears, but I hear a meow again. Except this time, it was canned and robotic sounding, like somebody playing a bad audio file with a cat. My gut starts to clench. It just sounded wrong somehow, and I can't figure out why. My hands were shaking when I unzipped my backpack to put my coffee thermo back in. I felt waves of nausea roll over me, and the air suddenly felt dense and thick. I was in a rainforest surrounded by trees and moss, but I felt like I can't get enough oxygen. I hadn't seen anyone for at least 10 miles, and I was distinctly aware of how far I was, and I couldn't really get any cell reception here either. Now, I hear the same meow again, but this time closer. I've never heard a cat like this before. It sounded like an imitation of a cat or a person saying meow. It was so tiny, cold and robotic. I now know that without hesitation, it's time for me to go immediately. I was panicked on the inside, but can't show fear, so I casually slung my leg over my bike and start riding. As soon as I got out of the bog, I ride the rest of the way home like a bat out of hell, glancing over my shoulder every few minutes. I can't see anything. I will never forget this experience for as long as I live. I've had some pretty disturbing things happen on my night rides, but nothing ever like this. I hate the fact that clearly something was imitating a cat, and I'm sure it was a recording. God knows who was out that deep into the forest too. I just hope I don't encounter this again. I used to love going for long hikes in the forest near where I live. I usually did it on summer's evenings. Yeah, I know this probably isn't the safest thing to do, but I always had my hunting rifle on me anyway. I mean, I'd be stupid not to. All it takes is one wild animal to go for you, and if you're unarmed, good luck to you. So anyway, I set out one summer's evening. I had my iPod playing some really chill songs and I felt really good about myself. I can't really get cell phone signal where I go because the trees cover it, but I like listening to my music. Now I was a good 40 minutes into my hike. There was enough moonlight for me to see where I was going. That's how I normally planned my hikes, when the moon was out of its brightest on the most clear days, so I can see everything. I'm really enjoying myself this night. I found true tranquility. I decided to stop for a minute, take off my headphones, and just pour out some of the hot chocolate I had in my flask. Now the second I do this, I have the feeling that I'm not alone, and I can't describe this feeling. It's almost like I'm comfortable in my own presence, but I don't want to be joined by anyone else, and this unsettles me. I just think I'm just being a little paranoid. I say to myself, thank God I've got my rifle, and I could have sworn I heard a laugh afterwards. No, it must have been just an animal, surely. So I go about drinking my hot chocolate. As I do so, and I'll never forget this, I hear someone whisper behind me, "Mind if I have some?" And a terrifying laugh follow. Now the next few seconds is a complete blur as I fumble, fall over getting up, grab my rifle, and scream myself and sprint in the complete opposite direction to where I heard the voice and back onto the trail. I try and scream out that I have a gun, but I can't get the words out. What's worse is I hear rustling behind me. I continue sprinting up the trail, only to slip temporarily again, and now on my back. I lay there wondering whether it's better to pretend I'm still. I look behind me, and I can see what appears to be the butt of a cigarette lit in the distance. Well, looks like I'm going to keep moving then. I get up again, and scream I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. What's worse, I'm sure I hear laughter in the distance after saying this. I sprint all the way back to my car. I don't even bother going back for my flask or anything. I immediately get on my radio and call it into the park rangers in the area, who say they're going to check it out and they want me to show them exactly where it is. I say you've got no chance and speed out of there. And the whole drive home, I can't stop thinking, who in their right mind was out there? How long were they stalking me for, and what on earth did they want? They clearly weren't mentally sane, whoever or whatever this was. Now I don't believe in the paranormal, but this could have easily been something like that, because why would you be out there with no torch or anything? Maybe it is an insane person. All I know is that I never got to the bottom of it, and I never went out on my own in the woods at night again. I come from a big country family. We live on a farm. We raise our own food and meat animals, and we hunt and process. My dad's first cousin is even a licensed taxidermist, so we get a lot of hunting in. For a bit of backstory, on the homestead I grew up on and that we still live in, it was my parents, my pop's first cousin and his wife, me and my 4 sisters, and my 4 female second cousins. So 4 adults and 9 kids. And sometimes my pop's brothers come to stay with us too, especially during the hunting season. So hunting season is on, and my pops and his brother and the cousins we live with are all getting ready to go hunting. Some of the kids decide to tag along with me, my sister and my cousin. We get permission from one of my uncle's friends to hunt his lands away, and it's basically on several hundreds of acres of forest. Now, an important fact, during the time we're setting up, my pops and uncles are quiet while the 3 of us kids talk, and my voice hasn't changed. This is important. Us kids keep chatting away while the adults are just getting louder and feeling more energy while they check out the survival equipment, making sure the guns are clean and working, etc. Now there's a rustling in the thick brush around us, and suddenly 3 creepy looking guys enter the clearing. They literally stop dead. One of them has a hand on his knife on his belt. They're clearly drunk as hell. They kept looking between A and S and my pops and uncle, like debating something. My pops and uncle stand up. Last bit of backstory, every guy in my family is huge. I'm 19 and 6'5". My dad is 6'10" and 280 pounds, Jesus. Just deeply intimidating men. And so are my uncles. The guys laugh nervously as my Uncle V picks up one of his rifles, pointing it at them. The dudes start running off into the clearing like the devil's after them. My pops immediately says we're clearing out. My uncles don't question it, and neither do we. We're freaking out, and we're totally scared now. I mean, we're taking things down really sloppily, but my pops doesn't say anything about us messing up the camping equipment. When we get back, we instantly call the police, who unfortunately don't take it serious. We also told the owner of the land to be careful of his kids. The craziest thing is that, at that moment I realised A and S and me, with my unchanged voices, are the only voices that these guys would have heard, so they clearly come across here, trying to find some children on their own. Just down the road from where I lived a few years ago, in southeast Australia, is an opening into about 100 acres of woodlands and bush that I frequently went into when I was younger to do the usual things, riding and camping, etc. I was out driving at around 11:30 with my girlfriend, and as we're in the area, I decided to show her the woodlands while we sat in the area, as she enjoys everything to do with nature. And it's still summer, so it's an extremely warm night. I left my car with the light shining into the trees as we weren't going too far in, and it was pitch black inside, and the 2 of us just kind of sat around chatting and just relaxing. She was sitting on a sort of map of the area that had been used before, and there was some plastic around us. I kept getting this feeling like we're being watched though. Now I've read on here a few people have said that they felt like they're in danger, although nothing around them was off. Everything was fine, apart from the feeling I had, and I just can't explain it. After lighting another cigarette, my nerves are calmed. I scanned the tree line again and realised that it looked different than before. It was only after starting into the dark that I saw that there was now moonlight, lighting up all around us, and I can see a black shape blocking where we come from before, this I didn't see before. I've got goosebumps just typing this, but the only way to describe it is that all sound just ceased and everything went dead silent for a few seconds. I had this disgusting feeling of dread coming over me as I saw motion in the dark path, as something literally crawls towards us on all fours. Now, I've seen nearly every animal in the outback here, and we don't have any large predators like in the US or Europe, but somehow I knew this thing was a predator, and it wasn't hiding from us, and it starts slowly coming towards us, clearly hunting. Now, I don't know if my girlfriend saw it or not, as it was kind of dark, but I saw that thing get off on its two legs, just staring at us. Now, I'm 6'4", and this thing was about another half-meter larger than me, with arms that were far too long. I mean, they're literally reaching the ground. I'm terrified now. All I can make out was an off-white, almost yellowish fur colour it had, and a strange wolf-like head. I wasn't able to move as it stared at me, but it's at this point that my girlfriend gasped, which seems to break the silence between us. I grab her arm, and we sprint to the car, slam into the doors. This thing is tearing after us too. We both screamed. We tear out of there quick, not even looking back. It took us half an hour to calm down enough to talk about what we had seen. We both discussed it many times, and know what we saw wasn't fake. We still have no explanation to it to this day. It's really scared me, and I've never went back to that area since. I always used to go camping a few years ago. I stopped doing it as much recently because of work, but I still get out there on the odd occasion, and I love it. I never had anything weird happen to me while I was actually camping. Some of the strangest things would happen when I was driving. It was never too bad. I'd just see strange lights in the sky, but I was sure that was just because I was tired. There was one thing I could never explain though, however. So I was driving back from a camping trip one summer's evening when I see somebody standing in the road. I don't know what they're doing, so I slowly drive up to them. They're not facing me. They're facing directly away from me. I turn my lights on to try and let them know that I'm there, but they don't move. I stop my car and get out and I say, "Hey bud, I need you to move out of the road for me please, is everything okay?" And I'm not kidding you, the second I finish my sentence, they fall to the ground. Well, I say they, all of their clothes do. It's almost like somebody just disappeared. I rub my eyes and I'm sure that I'm just sleep deprived and hallucinating, and I get back in my truck and slowly drive towards it. To my horror, I can see only a pool of blood exactly where I thought the person was standing, but it's dried blood like it's been there for weeks. I have no idea what it is. I immediately do a U-turn, scream to myself for what felt like an eternity, and get the hell out of there. To this day, I still have no idea what happened or who that was. There was nowhere for them to have run, and if they did, I would have saw footsteps in the dirt. There was neither. The drive home from work was always a long one for me. I had to drive through miles of woodland roads completely on my own. It was about an hour's drive, but I got used to it. I used to get finished on my night shift at about 10 o'clock, and I'd always turn on the radio and just enjoy my drive. There was one cold winter's night in December that really shook me up though, however. So I'm about 10 minutes into the drive, trying to demist my dashboard, when suddenly I have a feeling come over me like I'm being watched, and I can't shake it. It's a weird feeling, but it went away after a few minutes, and as I'm driving, I suddenly realise that I've lost my power steering. That's odd. It normally comes on again if this happens, which it rarely does, but then I see my lights go off, and my engine cut out. It was almost like somebody let off an EMP in the atmosphere. Everything just stops, and I crawl to a halt. I'm confused out of my mind, but I'm not scared. And as I'm sitting there, I become aware of just how dark it is around me. It's literally pitch black because of the trees. 10 seconds later, the radio comes on, and I can hear a staticky voice saying, "Please don't be scared." And suddenly, my engine comes back on without me turning the ignition, and everything else goes back to normal. Needless to say that I was terrified in this moment. I drive back home as quick as I possibly can. Nothing like it ever happened since, and I still have no explanation to it to this day. I grew up in the south. There's tons and tons of beautiful places to see that haven't been taken over by concrete yet. It's nice. But along with that, it's pretty boring. Being a teenager and wanting to go out and have fun led to mostly improvising with your buddies and hoping that something good can come out of the night. There wasn't really a local spot to go and hang out at, like a club or cool bar, and the places that were close to us were boring, because we'd went to them so often. I'm sure if you've ever lived in a rural area, you can understand it. Something that I found a ton of enjoyment in as a team was just cruising around super late at night listening to music. I would fill up my gas tank, grab something to drink, and I'd just drive off until the sun comes up. It was a way to clear my head and relax. Those country roads are always fun to drive down at 2 AM, and was just also the right amount of spooky. I don't know why that made me laugh. Well, one night, I absolutely got more than I bargained for. I can't remember what month it was exactly, but I knew for a fact it was in the summertime, because I was out of school, and I also remember it being a comforting, chilled night. So, if I was to guess, it was probably around July or August. I was cruising around like I always did, and was completely worry-free. I had music blaring, and I'm in my zone. I decided to head down and park just out of boredom. This particular park is at the end of a very long stretch of desolated country road, but 'tis a really pretty drive because of that. When I say desolate country road, I don't mean that it's some dirt road that goes through the woods or anything crazy. It's a normal paved road, but there really is nothing on it after a certain point. The entire road takes about 20 minutes to drive down, and to get to the park after about 10 minutes into the drive. That's where the houses start spreading out further and further before there's none, and just a road leading to a park. I think a lot of the reason I like this drive is, at night, it's so creepy, and there's really no getting over that. I love the adventure of it. Now, the park isn't open for camping or anything. It's mostly just lots of land with walking trails and biking trails set up through miles of woodland. So obviously it's around 3 AM in the morning. It's pretty dead. I made it there and just did a slow normal loop around the park. The night before it stormed so badly. So I remember my parents and I had to take shelter because of the threat of a tornado. There ended up being no tornado, but the storms were pretty rough. Because of it, I come up on a fallen tree in the road that looped around to the exit of the park that must have been caused by the storm. It wasn't some massive tree or anything, but I knew for a fact that there was no way it could have gotten there from a car, obviously. It was pitch black everywhere besides the front of my car because of my headlights, and because of that, I immediately ruled out backing up the entire way. I just drove when I entered the park. I knew that this was super dangerous and there was no way. At this point on the road, there was flat land on each side of me. I figured that it would make the most sense just to back up to the grass beside me, just a little, and then drive back the way I come. It was a one-way loop around the park, but I wasn't really worried about going out in the wrong way because it's so late. So now I start to back off the road so I can get my car to turn around. All was good until I pull off onto the road. I totally didn't take into account how wet the grass was and the amount of mud there is. My car went absolutely nowhere. My back tyres are completely stuck and were spinning in places where I didn't think they could. I start getting scared now. It really isn't the most ideal of situations to be in. I immediately take my cell phone out of my pocket and saw that I had service, which comes as a massive relief. I call my parents and tell them what's happening and where I was. I'm pretty annoyed, but they said that they're going to pay for the tow truck to get me. My parents both drove their small 4-door sedans, and they said that they would be zero help in the situation that I'm in. It was about 45 minutes away from my home and most of human civilization, so I was pretty sure I'm going to be stuck there for at least an hour before someone comes to get me. It's a freaky feeling. But I try getting out of my head and just continue listening to music and playing on my phone. There's not really a lot I can do. After I kind of calmed down from the initial anger I had, I started to check out my surroundings. I didn't even notice at first because everything's going on, but in front of my car's placement was a field that's full of deer. It's the most I've ever seen in my life. There legitimately must have been 40 deer just walking around eating grass. The field wasn't directly in front of my car, but if I was to get out and throw a rock, I would have easily hit one. So if I'm gonna guess, they're probably about 30 yards away. I watch him for a little bit, but I'm quickly over it and start browsing through my socials on my phone. They seem to have been over it quicker than I was because they all go back to eating grass after figuring out I'm not going to attack them. After browsing my phone for 15 minutes, I finally get a call back from my parents letting me know that the tow truck guy's coming. He's about an hour and a half away. Still to this day, I remembered hearing that and thinking, "You've got to be kidding me." I understood that me and only me is the reason that I'm in this situation, so I can't complain. But I mean, come on. I decide that the smartest thing to do now is to make sure all the doors are locked and lay back and sleep for a bit. So that's what I do. Okay, here we go. So I wake up 45 minutes later to the feeling of being watched. I'm not sure if anyone has ever experienced it before. I don't know how common it is, but it's almost like a sixth sense was going off in my head telling me I need to wake up. Now. Waking up to that feeling in that situation is horrifying. I sit up and immediately check my surroundings to see nothing. I look through my car very quickly for any kind of weapon and find a pocket knife. A pocket knife. Great. I'm really scared now, even though I haven't saw or heard from anyone. I was shocked to see that the field of deers in front of me was still full. I don't know anything about the animal, but I guess they were just gonna move. But they're motionless. I call my parents back to see if they've heard anything. I decide not to mention how scared I am because I know it's gonna worry them. And there's no updates from the tow truck guy, so this can't be much worse. The last call just lasted a few minutes, and I felt like an idiot. They both had to wake up for work quickly after, and now they've spent over $100 to try and get me home, and they're worried about me. We hung up, and I looked up from the phone, and immediately went from 0 to 100 in a panic. All of the deer in front of me had perked up, staring in the same direction in front of them. Every single one of them. One of them stopped dead in their tracks, standing completely still. The others followed, looking at something. I put my high beams on and stared, waiting for absolutely anything to happen. But there's nothing. I tapped my horn real quick. They don't even budge. That's what scares me. They were completely glued to what was in front of them instead of being scared by me. I know they were looking into the woods, but where I was, I can only see them. I can hear my heartbeat, and I grabbed my pocket knife and just waited for something to happen. I would say it was about a minute after I honked. Every single one of them in unison ran the opposite direction that I'm in. And now within 10 seconds, it's completely empty with just me in the field. I'm petrified in fear. I knew that staying in my car would be the safest thing, but I'm now stuck. My head is on a swivel. I'm freaking out in every possible way. I assumed that it's a bear or something, but it could have been absolutely anything. I was convinced at that point that it's the devil himself. I don't know what to do now. I knew that the tow truck was close by, but I have no idea where. I start shaking because of nerves, and just look around me to make sure nothing was by me, and focusing on the field in front of me. I did this for what felt like an actual eternity, sitting in complete silence and darkness in the middle of nowhere, waiting for something to jump out and attack me. Now 15 of the longest minutes of my life go by, and I start to see lights break through the tree line on the road. As it gets closer, I see it's a tow truck guy. The lights on in his truck feel like Jesus coming. He gets up to me and I jump out of the car and say, "Do you have a gun?" I tell him what's happened, and he said something's definitely nearby. He let me know that he grabbed his shotgun in the truck and assured me that it's probably a bear or bobcat. He gave me the whole, "They're more scared of you than you're of them" crap. The tree was small enough for him to sort of bulldoze it out of the way and hooked up my car. He wasn't really listening to what I was saying about the story, but knew I was shaken up from it. The whole time, I still had my eyes glued on the field looking for anything. He was completely done with everything in about 15 minutes, and he told me that to follow his truck out of there and onto the main road's the best bet. I got in my car and was ready more than anything to get out of there. We start to move away from the spot I'm in, and I still have my head on a swivel, completely shaken up. As we're driving away, I look in my rear view, and just out of the way, I could see the partially lit up spot where I was from the vehicle lights. I watch in my rear view mirror as a man comes out of the tree line behind my car and walks into the middle of the road watching us. He's a huge person too. My heart stops. I legitimately start bawling out of fear. I can't see any details of the man. I don't care about that, honestly. The feeling when we're driving away was the worst of my life. He stands there the whole time. Now he was there watching me, creeping up on me when I'm completely alone for a very long time. Maybe even coming up to my window watching me sleep. That's a feeling that I can't quite put into words. The entire time we're driving off, as long as I can see him, he doesn't move. He just watches. A million things are racing through my mind now. I was scared that there might have been multiple people waiting for us. I was trying to figure out if I should start beating on my horn or what. I decide all I want to do though is get out of there, more than anything. The second we finally got out of the park and was able to be on two roads, I drive past the tow truck driver doing at least 70 miles per hour. I run inside, quickly saying sorry to my parents and nothing more, run into my room, not sleeping for a single second that night. I was searching everywhere for what could have happened, escaped convicts, whatever, and I've come to the conclusion that I'm never going to know who was out there or what they were planning to do to me. I never told my parents this story either until years after, and it freaked them out when I told them it, even in my older age. I never went back to that park ever again, and I never will for as long as I live. Years ago, When I was still a teenager, my friend Justin and I would often go longboarding at night. As my friends and I are quite the night owls, we love the freedom of almost never seeing another soul on the roads or the paths we frequented. Even when using main roads, it would be very rare to see a car out so late in such a rural area. And you could see or hear them coming from very far away due to their headlights and the noise of the vehicle disrupting the peace. We were really into it at the time, and would often ride our boards for miles and miles, not seeing anyone until the sun was up. One particular night, we decided to ride a few miles away from our usual back roads to take one of our favourite hidden routes. It began with a narrow, paved path that was the only piece of land separating two sides of a long lake. It would often sink under due to rain, and we wanted to seize the opportunity to use it before it rained and went underwater again. It was roughly 2 miles long and extremely relaxing to ride through due to scenery. After making it to the end of the lake, we decided to keep moving and continue on our way and turn into a very close path that leads into a densely wooded area of a national park. As we came up to the first hill, we looked down at the bottom into the blackness. We both noticed what appeared to be a tiny ball of light moving down there. At first we think it's a park ranger, but it moves so strangely, and it was extremely difficult to make out what it is. Rather than shine our flashlights down, we curiously watched out for a few moments, whispering to each other what it could be. And all at once, that small light turned into multiple blinding lights and extremely loud revving sounds. Overwhelming our senses as to become accustomed to the darkness and silence. Acting purely on fear, we instantly turned around and ran as fast as we could, hearing yelling and revving gaining behind us. By sheer luck, we managed to run off the path into a very dark, very overgrown hole in the side of a hill overlooking where we just come from. We decided to hide in the natural dugout of this hill, hoping the plants and darkness would be enough to protect us from whatever was happening out there. We watched our pursuers ride out to where we originally were standing. There were 4 men, 2 on 4-wheelers, 2 on motorbikes, each other yelling something, but we can't make out what they're saying due to the distance. We felt safe enough to whisper softly to each other and speculate who these people could have been. Our first thought was that they might be park rangers of some kind, although we've never seen any in here, and we've been here a lot of times. And honestly, we doubted that this country had the budget for them this deep, unless they're on a big manhunt or something, which has happened in neighbouring states. Besides, these men are on vehicles that are inappropriate for paved bike trails. They're very angry too, and we don't know why. They call out for us for a while, yelling things like, "We know you're there, and we can see you, come out." We stay silent and decide to call on their bluffing instead of running. Eventually, I heard one of the men yell, "Find them now," and smash a bottle. That had erased any hope that they're rangers. We watched them split up, and each of them gone a different way down a series of paths on their vehicles, including the one that we've just come from. It took us what felt like ages to move. We're frozen in fear in that dugout, watching the lights from the vehicles travelling through the woods and paths. One of them already come in full circle and passing the point that we started on. I thought about calling for help, but I was too afraid. I was scared that the smallest amount of sound would give away our location. After waiting for the lights of the vehicles to reach our furthest distance yet, we finally summoned the nerve to get up and to run somewhere far enough away from them to make a call. We ran as hard and fast as we can through the woods, since their headlights gave their locations away on the paths. We would hide again whenever we felt like they're close. Our available hiding spots were getting progressively worse as the woodland became less dense, and the fear is overwhelming. Finally though, we emerged from the woods onto the intersection of the 2 main roads, far enough away from where we started. We ducked down into the ditch to call for help. I opened my phone. I noticed I had recent missed calls from one of our friends, Connor, who we're supposed to meet up with after our longboarding excursion. I called him and frantically asked where he is. Luck's with us again, and he hadn't given up on our plans despite us ignoring him. He's only a few miles away now, already heading in our direction. I gave him the names of 2 of the streets we're near. I explained that we need to be picked up immediately. He agrees to speed over to us while Justin and I were waiting and hiding. Thankfully, Connor arrived before any of them men did. We bolted into the back seat of his car, yelling for him to get out of there. He took off fast. Relief doesn't begin to explain how I felt after being safely driven home. After explaining everything that happened to Connor, we ended up just moving on with our night and decided not to call the police. We figured they'd be gone by the time any officer made it out there, and that we're putting ourselves at risk by admitting that we were breaking the law being out there. Justin and I later admitted to each other that when the Reverend started, we could see our minds going to chainsaw killer or something worse. Frustratingly enough, whatever them weird men saw that made them want to chase us so bad, we actually never saw, so they even had no reason to chase us. I never found out what they were actually doing or why they're so angry at us. I just know we're in a very dangerous situation, and to be honest, we're probably lucky to make it out of there alive. Me and my friend John loved to go for hikes in a national park that was a couple of hours drive away from where we lived. We'd often end up camping overnight. We'd always bring our camping gear in case we didn't make it back in time off the trail when it was dark. Now, we usually did this in summer evenings. Oftentimes we'd never encounter anyone else except for the odd park ranger. It was normally nice to see them, and we'd have a good laugh for a little bit. I always respected park rangers and embraced them when I saw them. Now, we set out on this one hike during one summer's evening 2 years ago. We're having a really good time. We're just talking about life. My friend's talking about not really liking his job much, and he's complaining about the hours and the work they have him do. He works in a hospital and really doesn't enjoy it, and I felt pretty bad for him. He's only starting and they're making him do all the dirty work pretty much. I wasn't too happy in my life either at the time. I had some big changes coming, and I was waiting on people, and I hate waiting. I really can't stand it. So we're talking about this for hours, and honestly, it's like a therapy session, and I really enjoy it. We keep walking and we're talking about the highs and lows of life, things that are coming, and things that we just want to see change. We're both saying it's surprising how that this time next year, we have no idea where we're going to be or what we're going to be doing. We're just putting the work in now. As we finish talking, we realise it's nightfall and there's already moonlight illuminating around us. I love moonlight, and we say, hey, how about we set up camp? John agrees. We walk further down, and just as we think we found a good camping spot, we see another tent further up. Now there's this horrible smell there, so we're sure that whoever this is has hunted an animal, and they've left it out there, which is kind of disgusting, but they might be skinning it, getting it ready to eat. My friend goes over to say hello, and just say that not to worry about us, we're going to move further away so he can have his own space. And what do you know? A park ranger appears. You can see his hat from a mile away. As we go over there, we realise that there's something not quite right about this ranger. We can't really tell what. He doesn't have a normal uniform on. Well, he has a hat at least, but he has a big coat on. It's not cold enough for a coat. He says very few words when he speaks to us. He just says, Yeah, I'm just setting up camp. We're out looking for someone, and that we should leave. I end up talking to him for a little while, and a lot of what he's saying doesn't make sense, and I get this really weird vibe from him. Like he's looking at me, but he's not, and he's trying to look through me at the same time, if that makes sense. He says, are we armed? And we say, yeah, we've both got hunting rifles, but we got a permit. He asks to see it, and my buddy shows him his. He says, that's okay, you haven't got to get yours out to me. And then John says that we need to get moving and should probably set up camp. He says fine, and the second he turns around, my buddy John grabs me hard by the arm and starts walking really fast, guiding me. Now I'm confused because, well, we're out in the middle of nowhere in a national park. There's gonna be lots of places we can go and set up our camp. But there was something different about the way he grabbed me. It felt really urgent. I can't describe it. I don't need to know any more about the situation, and I just start to lightly jog with him. The second we're away from the camp, I turn back and I can see the ranger still watching us. He's standing in the exact same spot as before though, which is something I find very odd. The second that we get over this hill, John says run, and I don't question it, and we start sprinting as fast as we can back the way we've come. He starts telling me, I don't think that's a park ranger. I say, what? You're kidding me? He says, no, just run. And we run for miles and have to stop eventually to catch up with our breaths. He says, I don't think that was a dead animal we could smell, and that guy definitely wasn't a park ranger. I said, how'd you know? He's just wearing a coat. He said when he looked at our permits, he didn't even look. And then he said it was fine, and a park ranger would have to check both of us had permits, pretty much. I got a horrible sinking feeling in my stomach as I remember turning round and looking at the park ranger just standing there staring at us, and a lot of what he said didn't make sense. God, it all clicked now. We continued hiking into the morning and eventually make it back to our car. We drive immediately to the park ranger station, and the park rangers there say that nobody's out in that area and they're definitely not camping. Eventually, they sent out some people to go and investigate and got the police involved. It turned out that they suspect that this guy had murdered someone, and where we encountered him, he moved everything and hid the body. The police are still out there looking for it today.